Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 3321, The Monsters in the Passageway. After Dorothy stepped into the door, the smell of sweet rust filled her nose, even before her eyes adjusted to the darkness. Frowning, she felt a sense of confusion. How come I can smell at all? She pondered aloud. She was just a soul of light which didn't have a sense of smell. But to her surprise, when she looked herself up and down, she seemed no longer an ordinary soul of light. Her soul body was filled with red threads which glowed like a lustrous ruby. These red threads formed veins on her neck, arms, and legs, and even formed outlines of her internal organs, eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. What happened to me? Dorothy took a few steps back in fear, instinctively bolting back to the door. However, at the thought of her grandmother, the fear in her heart dissolved like snow in the summer. No matter what kind of fate was waiting for her, she was willing to accept it. If Dorothy had been to the Soul City, she would have found that everything that was happening to her soul of light was very similar to stepping into the Holy Soul realm. The only difference was that she didn't need to enter the Soul Cloud, she only had to step through the door. Since her soul now had gained the 5 senses, she became more sensitive to the illusions around her. She could even see the dark passageway before her quite clearly. Are these prisons? She frowned. On both sides of the passageway, countless rooms separated by menacing fences lined the path. The fences closest to the door were all broken. It seemed that someone or something had escaped the prison. Dorothy continued to move forward cautiously along the passageway, her gaze constantly sweeping across the rooms on both sides. She needed to be vigilant now. All of them are empty. Have all the things locked in them run away? But I have seen those monsters before. In her eyes, those monsters represented fear. When she was young, she often woke up screaming from nightmares of these monsters. Yet, at the same time, these monsters also represented strength. She needed strength. She knew she was only going to get it through these monsters. Clenching her fist, she knew she wanted to face them. As she kept walking, she passed by more and more empty cages. She couldn't help but feel a bit disappointed. After all, she had summoned up the courage to open the door, only to be greeted by empty prisons. This was not what she had expected. Just as she passed by another empty room, she suddenly heard a rustling sound coming from up ahead. She quickened her pace, her heart beating rapidly. As soon as she approached the iron fence, a big hand covered in thick fur suddenly grabbed at the metal bars. Bang! All the fences shook violently. Bang, bang, bang. Awoo! When the other monsters heard this, they too rushed towards the fences. They pounded on the metal bars aggressively, howling and shrieking in frustration. The entire passageway became noisy at this moment. Squinting through the darkness, Dorothy thought she saw something in the distance. To her horror, she realized it was a humongous monster's mouth, gaping widely. Its surging aura forced Dorothy to take a few steps backward. The monsters in the prisons began to scream excitedly, as though they were alerting something. From the depths of the darkness, 2 rays of red light suddenly appeared. The red lights suddenly grew nearer and nearer, quickly closing the distance between them and Dorothy. As the monster approached, Dorothy could finally see its face clearly. It looked like a huge monkey. Its limbs were long and dangling, covered in thick fur that hung low above the ground. Its fingers had dangerously sharp nails that scratched the earth as it ran towards her. Dorothy's eyes widened. It was the same monster that had observed her from the door countless times before. I'm here now, Dorothy said cautiously. She wanted to find out who it was. Somehow, she felt as though she knew it from before. It had observed her many times, and she had also observed it many times. Somehow, it didn't seem appropriate for her to ask this question. The monster stretched out its long arms, and its sharp nails were extended towards Dorothy. Even in the dark, the monster's nails glinted menacingly. Dorothy had no doubt that this monster could easily rip her into shreds. However, it stopped abruptly and knelt down on one knee before her. We've been waiting for so many years, it stammered, as though exhausted. It's so painful. Please fulfill your promise and help us. Its voice was hoarse, like two pieces of rusty iron rubbing against each other. But Dorothy saw past its strange voice. She could tell that this monster was begging her. Help you. Dorothy's eyes were filled with confusion. The curses on our bodies have lasted for too long. Many of my companions couldn't hold on any longer and all ended their lives. I dragged them out of the prisons and buried them, the monster responded woefully. Now, Dorothy had new pieces to her puzzle. The monsters in the rooms had been locked away here, cursed to wait for her arrival. However, it seemed she had gotten there a little too late. The big holes on the fences must have been created by this monkey-like monster in front of her. The monsters hadn't escaped, instead they had been buried. I don't know how to remove your curses, Dorothy said slowly. Her mind was whirling. Her grandmother, Yasmin, was well aware that she had this door, and that she could order around the monsters within it. However, her grandmother had never mentioned what this door meant, or what her relationship was with these monsters. Maybe, even Yasmin didn't know. As soon as Dorothy finished speaking, the monsters on both sides of the passageway immediately roared in despair. Her answer did not satisfy them. Whoosh, the monster swiped at her, enveloping her tiny soul in its massive fist. Impossible, how could you not know? The monster's voice was filled with indignation. This is not what we agreed on. You should have saved us. The monster was extremely powerful. With a simple flick of its wrist, it could squeeze Dorothy to death. She felt as though she were a fragile porcelain doll in its hand. Awoo, awoo, the voice of the monsters on both sides of the passageway gradually sounded the same. Do you hear them? The monster's grating voice continued. They said if you couldn't do it, they would kill you. They have been in despair for too long. They don't care about killing off their last bit of hope. Dorothy trembled. She knew that this was not only a threat, but a bared truth. She had grown up blissfully, with a rather uneventful childhood. Never in her wildest dreams would she have imagined that this whole time, these monsters had been hoping for her to come. Even as she stepped through that door, she had known nothing about it. She sympathized with them. Desperately, she too wished she knew how to lift the curse. Who? Just as everyone was clamoring, they suddenly heard a sharp voice from the depths of the darkness. The master of the voice seemed to be very authoritative. The instant it spoke, the passageway instantly grew silent. Biting her lips, Dorothy muttered apologetically, I really don't know. Who? The voice in the distance continued grunting. The monster that held Dorothy in its hand listened for a while before dropping her onto the ground. Its tone slightly softened. Follow me. Chapter 3322, Two Doors. Under this circumstance, Dorothy was left no other choice. All she could do was to follow this tall and strong monster. They walked through more than 10,000 feet of passageway with rooms on either side filled with monsters with long hair. At every room she passed, the monsters would rattle the bars in their excitement and anger. Suddenly, Dorothy felt deep inside her that she had a debt to pay them. Perhaps she owed them something in her previous life and now was the time to repay them for it. They walked 10,000 feet more when a faint voice came from a room on the left. It was the one who had given the order. Dorothy approached the cell and saw a long-haired monster whose hair had turned white. Its body was half the size of an ordinary long-haired monster, and it seemed weak and frail. But the white-haired monster appeared to be highly respected. At the very least, the others obeyed it. It observed Dorothy for a moment before asking, have you really forgotten everything? Dorothy nodded and replied honestly, I remember nothing but this door. Who? The white-haired monster sighed. That makes sense. If you remembered anything, you would have come here a long time ago. Coming here is your only way to get home. Get home. Dorothy's eyes widened. Was I born here? The white-haired monster shook its head and pointed not far ahead where there was a fork in the passageway. At the fork was a door on the left and a door on the right. The door on the left is your way home, the white-haired monster said. Dorothy blinked in uneasiness, her heartbeat quickening, and she asked, what about the door on the right? That door leads to stage 33 of the other shore, the white-haired monster replied. Dorothy narrowed her eyes on hearing this. Upon learning her grandmother was in danger, she wanted little else other than to enter stage 33 of the other shore. But she knew this was impossible for her. She first had to become an eternal warrior and she might never even achieve that. All her hopes were now placed on that door. She did not expect there to actually be a path leading to stage 33 of the other shore. If I want to step into stage 33, I must become an eternal warrior and reach the eternal realm. Can I do that in my current state? Dorothy asked. Of course not. The white-haired monster laughed. You do not want to go home, you want to go to stage 33 of the other shore. The long-haired monster asked, hovering behind Dorothy as she looked forward down the passageway. Dorothy was their race's only hope. Just now, the long-haired monster and the white-haired monster had discussed whether they should tell her the way home. If they told her, would she move on and leave them behind? Should they explain to her what had happened in that world? What if she insisted on doing as she pleased? They had prepared a detailed explanation, but it seemed that Dorothy was not interested in the way home at all. And so the long-haired monster couldn't help but ask her that question. I have to go to stage 33 of the other shore, Dorothy replied firmly. The long-haired monster and the white-haired monster looked at each other, their eyes twinkling with surprise. If she wanted to remove the curse, she would also have to go to stage 33 of the other shore. No matter what Dorothy's purpose was, at least she was headed in the same direction as them. It is true that in your current state, you are unable to step into stage 33, but I have a way to get you in, said the long-haired monster. But you have to tell me your purpose of going there. To save my grandmother, Dorothy blurted out. The long-haired monster nodded. We can help you with this matter, but we ask that you please keep your previous promise. To help you remove the curse? Dorothy inquired. Yes, Dorothy had already made up her mind as she walked down the passageway. Her current fate seemed to have been determined in her previous life. She had no other choice but to fulfill that promise. She would not refuse these monsters' requests. Now they revealed they could help her save her grandmother in stage 33 of the other shore. If they really could help her, she would risk her life if she had to. She would obviously not hesitate to agree with them. In the Crane Blood Province, the Star Crane City was the most prosperous city of the Bering race. 3 ancient towers were like pillars stretching out of the city to the sky. Each ancient tower had thousands of floors, and housed the core disciples of the Bering race. The G clan was located in the Supreme Memorial Tower, between the other 2 towers. 200 other Shore Realm warriors had lined up on the capacious top floor of the Supreme Memorial Tower. The G clan had posted a notice some time ago, announcing they planned to select some strong other Shore Realm warriors to join the Yellow Emperor Guards. This was an excellent opportunity for the other Shore Realm warriors scattered among the ordinary citizens to show their potential. Joining the Yellow Emperor Guards would mean obtaining better resources and even some powerful other shore tokens. Naturally, since the notice had been posted, more and more warriors flooded this place with hopes of becoming a Yellow Emperor Guard. But now, their faces filled with confusion as they began muttering to themselves. They were unsure of the reason for their being sent here. This was the headquarters of the G clan, a place that was difficult for even the most powerful warriors in the Crane Blood Province to enter. A huge gap existed between the G clan and ordinary people. Why would the warriors who applied to be one of the Yellow Emperor Guards be sent here? Enter. The guards escorted the warriors into a palace. A moment ago, they had smelled the faint scent of the wood in the corridor, but that was replaced with a strong smell of blood after they entered the palace, so strong that some almost passed out. After they had entered, they saw a young man with black hair curl up in the corner of the palace. He was naked, covered in blood, and his eyes flashed with a fierce light. When the other Shore Realm warriors saw him, they were instantly overtaken with a sense of foreboding. Some wished to retreat, some wondered what was going on. Suddenly, the door closed behind them and the guards shouted, "If you kill that young man, you qualify to join the Yellow Emperor Guards." That young man doesn't appear to have even reached the other Shore Realm. He is at most a consummate true god. He can't even possess the power of 1 divine megaton. I will kill him. It was obvious how big the gap between the other Shore Realm warrior and the true god was. Such a large gap dispelled the fear in some hearts. Others still kept a cool and collected head, not getting ahead of themselves. If killing this man was easy, why were 200 other Shore Realm warriors sent here all at once? Those who recognized something was not quite as it seemed retreated to the corner, and some even looked for ways to escape. But with the means of the G clan, how would the mere other Shore Realm warriors be able to escape? The black-haired boy stood up and a sinister aura began filling every corner of the room. Then, like a wolf ravaging a flock of sheep, he pounced on the crowd. Streams of blood spurted and sprayed on every wall as the warriors were ruthlessly killed. Chapter 3323, Use him. It only took him 5 whole minutes to slaughter the 200 warriors at the other Shore Realm. If that was not impressive enough, he was able to kill 198 of them in 2 minutes. The rest were a bit difficult to get rid of because they resisted with their other shore tokens. It came to a point that one of them transformed into a cloud of black fog, so naturally, his body couldn't be torn to pieces. On the other hand, the remaining man used his other shore token to open a box space and hid himself within. Though the methods of these two were unique and effective, they did not last long. Eventually, the boy still dealt with them and killed them without breaking a sweat. Pa, pa, pa. As soon as the boy was finished with the last man standing, a round of applause roared from the other end of the hall. It was a woman in a white fox fur robe, looking beautiful, dignified, and powerful. "You've made rapid progress," that woman said. The black-haired boy squinted his eyes and a darkness flashed behind his eyes. Suddenly, he propped his hands to the ground as if he were a beast, and pounced on the woman without hesitation. Though it made him look primitive, the killing intent was definitely aggressive. There was no way the ordinary warriors at the other shore realm could avoid this. The woman, however, just cocked her head and grabbed the boy by the arm, completely unthreatened. Whoosh! With one swing, she tossed him away as if with little effort. Her one move contained about 8,000 divine megatons of force. Bang! Just like that, the black-haired boy was sent into the sky and slammed right into the wall. The towering Supreme Memorial Tower let out a little shake in reaction to the impact. The woman scoffed, "But no matter how much you have progressed, you are still no match to me now." As she turned around to speak, the boy did not hesitate to pounce on her for the second time. This time, her eyebrows were raised, surprised to see how confident the boy was. Like the first time, she grabbed him by the hair and lifted him off the ground. Left and right, she smashed the boy with no mercy whatsoever. Boom! The force sent cracks into the arrays that protected the ground, and the boy was unmoving. Still holding him by the head, the woman dragged him to the other side of the room. They entered the transmission door which transported them to an underground hall. A strange stone was positioned at the center of the hall. It appeared large, like a huge heart, but it was stronger and sturdier than anything else. A line of warriors surrounded the stone, all of them having reached the Holy Soul realm. They were the elites, the very foundation of the Bearing race. A young man in a brocade robe chuckled at the sight of the woman. "You taught him a lesson again." The woman, on the other hand, couldn't help but sigh with resignation. "He won't give up until he is killed. It's good that he can be subdued now," the man in brocade robe continued. "However, when he becomes as strong as Usman, I'm afraid he will become a scourge to us." The man seemed worried, but tried his best not to let it overcome him. In the past, Usman's behaviors had attracted the attention of all the super forces. Usman was a very special, rare being. Unlike most warriors at the other shore realm, he did not need to rely on the other shore tokens. More than that, he did not seek the protection of the chaotic source spirits when in battle. For some reason, his physical body and evil soul grew so much that he could even go up against the eternal warriors without fail. His way of growth was so unique that it caught the eye of many forces, and even made them jealous of the black ship. However, his betrayal completely shifted his appearance to the super forces. Filled with so many negative emotions and intentions, Usman was an ungrateful man. It was because of this that he grew to become an extremely evil existence, one that could never submit to anyone. Once Yellow Thirk took the black-haired boy back, it worried the masters. They saw his frightening potential to follow in the footsteps of Usman. However, because the strength of the black-haired boy was still weak and immature, he could still be watched and controlled. If he continually grew at immense speed, it wouldn't be long until even Yellow Thirk found it difficult to suppress him. "We are mere executors," the woman spoke out, dignified. "As for the consequences, I believe the Emperor might have his own plans." Without any trace of gentleness, she dragged the boy and lifted him onto the heart-like stone. Just as the boy made contact with the heart-like stone, it made a plop sound. It seemed that this heart-like stone suddenly throbbed. The stone did not move, but it had a powerful sound or vibration from within it. Plop, plop, plop. A few seconds had passed and the black-haired boy gradually fell asleep. In his sleep, his bones extended, his hair grew, and he inched taller and taller by the minute. However, everyone watching was not at all surprised. They knew very well of the effects of the stone. Plop. From a boy with the body of an 8-year-old, the boy had the body of a 14-year-old within a few minutes. "Look, he's about to wake up," the young man nudged the people around him. "He's definitely going to cause some trouble," he added. Though a few people were worried, the woman did not seem threatened. The black-haired boy's eyes fluttered and eventually opened. As the woman prepared to pin him down, he ended up not moving at all. He only lay on the stone, and then looked up to the sky. It was as if he saw something that no one else had seen. Surprised with his calmness, the woman and the young man looked at the scene and blinked their eyes in confusion. Soon, a space fluctuation came from the left side of the hall. From it, powerful cultivators at Holy Soul Realm walked out of the channel, and the last one to enter was a middle-aged man with sharp eyes. Your Majesty. At the sight of Yellow Thirk, all warriors immediately knelt down and bowed. But Yellow Thirk seemed a bit anxious. He waved his hand to signal everyone to stand. They all made their way towards the side of the black-haired boy. Just then, Yellow Thirk reached out and gently put his palm against the boy's forehead, then looked up into the sky. And though they were all underground, he saw through the ceiling almost immediately. Under the scorching sun, a space was violently reverberating. It was as if something powerful was going to emerge. This lasted for only a few seconds, until Yellow Thirk looked back down. The boy's expression returned to normal as well. Meanwhile, the Emperor's face lit up as he scanned through the room and looked at the officials who were giving him expressions of worry. He smiled. What are you all so worried about? Your Majesty, it's just that this child is the same as Usman. He can't be tamed, are we? The young man in brocade robe responded anxiously. But before the young man could even finish his words, Yellow Thirk let up a hand and asked him to stop. While it is true that Usman can't be tamed, I did not intend to treat him as a member in the first place. Your Majesty, have you found a way to control him? The young man asked again. But Yellow Thirk shook his head. I just want to use him to control this world. There was a great connection between Usman and the entire source world. However, the connection remained hidden and undetectable despite the many efforts to find it. But the situation had changed now. With the guidance of the element spirit civilization, he possessed a decent understanding of primitive land that could help them dig out useful information and resources. Chapter 3324, To the Blooming Jade Stage. The raven-haired boy's face remained dull and stiff for over an hour. During this time, the fluctuation within the source world quietly disappeared. When the boy came back to his senses, he jumped off the stone. His instinct was to run away. But too many powerful warriors were currently in the underground hall, any one of them could easily subdue him. Before he could even take another step forward, he was trapped in an invisible cage. Yellow Thirk walked briskly toward the raven-haired boy. He figured that the boy would quickly get all memories of Usman, but he was surprised to find otherwise. While the boy reacted to the mention of Usman, he didn't remember much about him. Yellow Thirk felt a tremor between his brows before he could say something. His face seemed to shift in color before he turned to the woman in white fox fur robe. Take him back. The latter merely nodded and dragged the boy away. Taking a step forward, Yellow Thirk disappeared from everyone's view, entering a dark room. His forehead began to crack, from which an eyeball emerged. Kill him. A voice resounded from the eyeball. Kill that brat. Its voice was full of fury. The element spirit race had a deep foundation. Even Yellow Thirk couldn't tell how powerful the second civilization was. In the face of everything in the source world, the element spirit civilization always seemed to remain calm. But this time, it looked rather exasperated. Kill whom? Asked Yellow Thirk. Zen, the eyeball nearly yelled back. Even Emperor Charm had died because of Zen, so Yellow Thirk had figured he should pay attention to the man. Besides, the descending rings they had obtained couldn't be used successfully. He highly suspected that the golden red chaotic source spirits in Zen's hand had something to do with it. Why the hurry? Asked Yellow Thirk. He has passed through the Soul City, the eyeball said. The Soul City? He's quite fast, said Yellow Thirk plainly. He passed through the Soul City in a single try and obtained 9 holy soul imprints. What? At that, Yellow Thirk couldn't hide his shock. The very idea of passing through the Soul City in a single try was truly astonishing. What was even more bizarre was the fact that Zen could obtain 9 holy soul imprints, something that had never before happened on the other shore. In fact, the news that Zen had obtained 9 holy soul imprints already spread through the souls of light in the Soul City. But the internal structure of the bearing race was complicated. It took some time for the news to spread layer by layer, delaying the dissemination. As a result, Yellow Thirk had yet to find out about what had happened to Daily. Since he's already passed through the Soul City, I'm afraid he'll want to go to the land of bone tribulation. We'd better snip him in the bud in stage 30 of the other shore, calculated Yellow Thirk. He seemed to have a good understanding of Zen even without having met him personally. Zen seemed to be the only special existence that entered the other shore. He had his very own corporeal body. When Yellow Thirk heard of the fact for the first time, he thought of the eternal scroll painting, something Zen could possibly enter. But at that time, Zen had just become famous in stage 4 of the other shore. There was a long way to go before he reached stage 32 of the other shore, so it wasn't the time to give it much mind. In truth, he had even doubted that it was likely Zen could reach stage 32 alive. But after only such a short time, Zen had already passed through the Soul City. Of course we will, continued the eyeball. But for security's sake, you must take action in the source world as well. You also need the golden red chaotic source spirits, after all. Must I personally lead the bearing race? Yellow Thirk wondered, narrowing his eyes. Though Eastern Emperor Tai and Yasamine couldn't come back now, the Pearhill wouldn't let them do anything easily. The fact made Yellow Thirk feel the need to set up certain strategies. Meanwhile, on stage 29 of the other shore, the Soul City had been open for 132 hours, and it was time to close it. Before the gate was shut, the souls of light in the Soul City emerged one after another. From afar, Zen saw Elvenia step out wearing a grim expression. He, on the other hand, walked up to her with a smile and asked, "How is it going this time?" 810 feet, Elvenia answered with her head bowed. "I've tried my best, but I'm still too slow." "You're already very quick, you obviously already surpass Libby's talent in this aspect," Zen assured her. But Elvenia merely pouted. She didn't want the Soul City to become a restrictive barrier. She was very eager to pass through it. This time, Elvenia had pushed herself to the limit. To a certain extent, even Libby, the top disciple of the Land of Sword Grief, couldn't catch up with her. But so what? A great gap still remained between her and Zen. It was impossible for Zen to wait for her the entire time. The test in the Soul City is a form of training, so you shouldn't be anxious. "I'll wait for you in the Land of Bone Tribulation," Zen assured her. Urgent was the current situation, so Zen had to press forward. A soul of light nearby quickly walked over to them, carrying an aura that seemed far stronger than the ordinary. It was none other than Libby, who had already passed the test of the Soul City. "Congratulations, Libby, I didn't expect you to pass the test so soon." Both Gabriel and Carver were still around Libby. Without Zen's incomprehensible record, Libby's performance was amazing in itself. But over the past few days, all attention had been given to Zen, both inside and outside the Soul City. Even Libby could feel that passing the test of the Soul City was a common thing, there was nothing to be excited about. Once she arrived at Zen's side, she immediately said, "I've also passed the test of the Soul City. I want to go to stage 30 of the other shore, and I heard that you know some kind of way to release the blood mist and dodge the Garudas. Can I go there with you?" Libby hadn't had much interaction with Zen. When they first met, she had even provoked him. Now she felt rather bad having to ask him for help. But Zen just smiled faintly and said, "We're both disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace, so we should help each other out on the other shore. If you need to go to a higher stage, I will help you, of course." Zen's answer had Libby overjoyed with gratitude. "Thank you, Zen." It was quite normal for disciples in the Land of Sword Grief to communicate with each other with open arms, but for Elvenia it was especially hard to accept. She secretly made up her mind about passing through the test of the Soul City as soon as she possibly could. The Soul City was located at the very center of the Constant Glory stage. Behind it lay a long and narrow plank road. At the end of it was a huge, round platform where densely distributed star rings led to the Blooming Jade stage, stage 30 of the other shore. Once he said goodbye to Elvenia, Zen used the blood fog spell to cover both himself and Libby as they moved along the plank road. The moment they arrived at the huge round platform on the opposite end, Zen saw a soul of light of the Holy Soul Realm waiting for him. The soul of light carried 2 wings on her back. She was a member of the Sun Crow race. "Elizabeth?" Zen asked in a low voice. While he couldn't quite see her face clearly, he was already well familiar with her aura after fighting against her several times. Elizabeth's presence had Libby rather nervous until she remembered that the Sun Crow race no longer existed. The remaining members were dependent on Zen, so Libby could feel at ease. Chapter 3325, 2 Layers. Under Zen's arrangement, all the members of the Sun Crow race had to stay in the Oneness Mountain for cultivation. In reality, however, they were simply on standby. The reason for that was if the Oneness Sky Palace ever encountered external intruders again, they would do their best to defend against them upon Zen's order. Still, the only person those Sun Crows followed was the real Emperor Charm. After they knew about the current situation, they thought that they would never betray him. Meanwhile, Elizabeth stared at Zen with an unreadable expression. Both of them were at the Holy Soul Realm, but the aura Zen emitted was much stronger. It made Elizabeth a little confused. "Zen, have you obtained the Holy Soul imprint? How many did you get?" she asked. For her, it was almost inevitable for Zen to obtain the Holy Soul imprint. However, she didn't know how many Holy Soul imprints he could get. 3 or 4, it might even be possible that he got 5 imprints. While Elizabeth pondered over the matter, Libby, who was beside her, answered first. Zen has passed through the Soul City on his first try and obtained 9 holy soul imprints. Upon hearing those words, Elizabeth's soul of light suddenly trembled. They even saw that the surface of her soul of light had fluctuated. 9 holy soul imprints, then, what did you see or what can you do with them? She asked in a shaky voice. Back then, she had gone to and returned from stage 29 of the other shore so many times. Not even the element spirit race could unravel the secret about the Soul City. If Zen obtained 9 holy soul imprints, then he might have obtained different opportunities. He can open and close the door of the Soul City freely, Libby said. On the other hand, Zen glanced at Libby. He was slightly thankful that she answered the questions for him. Now, Elizabeth asked such questions just out of curiosity. However, he refused to reveal the secret of the starry rock fish in the Soul City. Yes, he nodded, and then continued, there is a switch to the door on top of the Soul City. Only then did Elizabeth realize that she had asked something she shouldn't have asked. If she talked to another master or even Emperor Charm that way, she might get punished. Yet, Zen had only avoided the topic. As soon as she came back to her senses, she changed the subject and said, Zen, you should stay in the Constant Glory stage for now. Don't go to the Blooming Jade stage. Why? Zen asked curiously. If you go there, the element spirit race would attack you. They would never let you set foot in the land of bone tribulation, Elizabeth replied. Since she had followed Emperor Charm while traveling on the other shore, she had witnessed how strong the element spirit civilization was. In her opinion, it was almost impossible for anyone to defeat the unbeatable element spirit civilization. Just because they will attack me in the Blooming Jade stage like you said, I have to stay in the Constant Glory stage all my life? Asked Zen. Elizabeth was stunned at Zen's question. Some paths are destined to be difficult, but we can't stop because of some obstacles, he said indifferently. In turn, Elizabeth was silent for a moment. However, she had already expected such an answer from him. If you want to go, please follow me. I'm very familiar with both the Blooming Jade stage and the element spirit race. Although it's a bit risky, I can help you reach stage 31 of the other shore. She offered. Libby blinked and said, the masters of our Oneness Sky Palace will be there to meet us. He doesn't need you. Although she knew that Elizabeth had already surrendered and wouldn't attack Zen, there was still a chance that she might do so. Elizabeth glanced at Libby, and then at Zen. Zen was the one to make the decision. I want to get there with my physical body, not my soul of light. I'll be back after I change my form. If you have better way to pass through the Blooming Jade stage, then of course I will choose the easier way, Zen said with a nod. After all, his top priority right now was to go to the land of bone tribulation. He didn't want to stay in stage 30 of the other shore. If his soul of light ever went there in the future, then there would probably be a fierce battle between him and the element spirit race. Then I'll wait for you here, Elizabeth agreed with a smile. After they were done, Zen left the other shore with his soul of light and entered it again with his physical body. He continued to use the blood fog spell to move forward. When he arrived at the star ring, Elizabeth and Libby were still waiting for him. Libby, I'm afraid I'll be in trouble when I go to the Blooming Jade stage this time. Why don't you stay here and wait for a while before going there? He suggested. Libby just chuckled at him and said, well, I have also stepped into the Holy Soul realm, so my soul of light isn't as fragile as an ordinary soul of light. You do indeed have the strength to fight against a physical body after you've reached the Holy Soul realm, but it is vastly different when you are against a truly powerful other shore creature. There is still a big difference between your strength and theirs. I suggest you stay here for the time being, Elizabeth said coldly. When she talked to Libby, she became as arrogant as she was before. Libby slowly answered, thank you for your concern, but I don't need anyone to give me any advice. Let's go, Zen declared. He did not want to participate in such a meaningless argument, so he walked straight to the star ring. In just a second, Elizabeth and Libby stepped into the star ring as well and turned into white beams of light that shot upwards. From stage 29 of the other shore, almost every stage had a specific arrangement. Stage 29 of the other shore had the Soul City, stage 31 had the Land of Bone Tribulation, and stage 32 housed the Eternal Scroll Painting. Only stage 30 of the other shore was considered normal. Therefore, the disputes in stage 30 had been the most intense since many chaotic eras ago. It was even safe to say that most races would fight for stage 30. But since the human race was trapped in stage 33 of the other shore and the nihility race was always on the defensive, the element spirit civilization gradually took control of stage 30. A large number of the members from the element spirit race stayed in stage 30, which they considered as their headquarters. Swoosh. The moment Zen left the star ring, the turbulent cold air blew over his body and made him stiff. When Libby walked out of the star ring, she also felt that her soul of light was about to solidify. She would have gotten injured if it wasn't for her colorless soul. As for Elizabeth, she had already adapted to the low temperature in the blooming jade stage, so she was well prepared. What a vast ice field! Zen exclaimed as he looked into the distance. The ice field was boundless, and it seemed that the entire blooming jade stage was made of ice. There were even rays of icy light that shone down from the sky above the blooming jade stage. Zen stared at the sky for a while and asked, "Is there another layer of ice above the blooming jade stage?" He looked around carefully and found that the ice light above them did not refract from below. It looked like there was another layer of ice above their heads. Yes, there are 2 layers on the blooming jade stage. The upper layer is extremely cold and could freeze both other shore creatures and the souls of light. No one can cross the upper layer, so we can only pass through the lower layer of ice, Libby explained. In other words, all the living beings in the entire blooming jade stage and the many temples and strongholds of various forces were all sandwiched between the 2 layers of ice. I wonder what better way of passing through you have come up with, Elizabeth, Libby said and glanced at Elizabeth. A faint smile graced Elizabeth's lips, and she said, "The better way I mentioned is to pass through the upper ice field." Chapter 3326, Penetrating Through the Ice. Libby was stunned for a while when she heard Elizabeth's suggestion. Then, she said, "What? Did you just suggest that we go through the upper ice field? Are you trying to kill us?" The upper ice field was a forbidden area in the blooming jade stage. If there wasn't a lower ice field, perhaps no one would have made their way to stage 31. Well, I have to admit that I am only interested in Zen's life. As for yours, I'm not interested in the slightest. You don't have to come with me if you don't want, Elizabeth retorted. At that moment, Zen chimed in and asked, "But since the upper ice field is so dangerous, why did you choose that path? According to your current situation, it's almost impossible for you to go through stage 30 in the normal way, unless you can overturn the entire element spirit civilization with your strength," Elizabeth explained. Elizabeth had always analyzed things from a third-person point of view. For instance, she was well aware of both Zen's ability and the strength of the element spirit civilization. Now, the death of Emperor Charm wasn't a big loss for the element spirit civilization, but they might have paid greater attention to Zen. What was worse was that the news Zen had passed through the Soul City might have caused a stir. "If you don't trust me, you can summon my emperor and he will prove my loyalty," Elizabeth pleaded with a serious look. "There's no need. I believe you," Zen said with a nod. Based on the current situation, he knew that the powerful warriors of the Sun Crow race had no choice but to follow him. Furthermore, she could never deceive him due to the influence of the bloodline worship. Now that Zen had agreed, Elizabeth decided to stop arguing with Libby. With a gentle flick of her wings, she flew up into the air and said, "I know of a way that leads to the upper ice field. Follow me." When Zen was about to activate the thunder materialization, he suddenly looked at Libby. An ordinary soul of light couldn't fly, but he still didn't know if a holy soul, which was also named colorless soul, was able to. To his surprise, several lines appeared on Libby's back and glowed brightly, then she quickly floated upwards and rose into the air. So a holy soul could fly, he thought as a pair of thunder wings formed behind his back. The crack of thunder filled the air, then he also flew up and followed closely behind Elizabeth. As they flew in the sky, they saw that the distance between the lower and upper ice fields was over 100,000 feet. Therefore, it was no easy feat to fly from the lower ice field to the upper one. At the same time, the temperature of the air around them became lower and lower as they continued to fly higher. Swoosh! A strong gust of numbingly cold wind blew over their faces. If such powerful winds caught even an ultimate-level indigo soul, then they would freeze to death and shatter into pieces. When the winds blew over Elizabeth, the meridians in her soul glowed and she easily resisted the cold. Meanwhile, Libby had much more difficulty doing so since she had just reached the Holy Soul realm. When she saw how Elizabeth dealt with the cold, she followed suit and the meridians in her soul also started to flicker with light. She managed to expel all the cold air that invaded her colorless soul in this way. As for Zen, although he did feel cold, he could still withstand it and didn't even bother to put up any defenses. After the 3 of them reached a height of 100,000 feet, they finally arrived beneath the upper ice field. Zen reached out his hand and touched the thick ice sheet above him. The moment his fingers touched it, white frost quickly spread around his hand like a monster's tentacles. He tried to pull his hand out, only to find that it was stuck firmly to the ice. Just as he was about to summon his strength to forcefully withdraw his hand, a ball of golden flames burst from the side and burned his hand. Phew! The flames blazed in his hand and quickly melted the white frost, and thus freed him from the ice. Be careful not to touch the ice, Elizabeth warned. Zen smiled with embarrassment and silently followed her. However, that sort of danger wasn't actually a problem for him. In fact, he could break through the thick ice directly if he wanted to, but on second thought, he remembered that their goal was to pass through the blooming jade stage without being noticed. Therefore, he decided not to mess things around and just follow Elizabeth's instructions. They flew along the ice sheet for a long while until they seemed to have arrived at the very edge of the blooming jade stage. There was a shallow channel at the edge of the ice sheet. Elizabeth flew straight into the channel, then her body began to emit the divine flame of the sun crow race. There were a few sizzling sounds, then thick, white fog spread out from where the fire and ice combined. After Zen and Libby watched Elizabeth melt the ice for a while, the two of them heard her voice from above that said, "The ice sheet is about 1,000 feet thick. Follow me, or you will get frozen in the ice." In turn, Zen and Libby went into the hole Elizabeth created and followed her into the ice. Like several moths that bore through a thick book, they slowly penetrated through the ice sheet with the help of the divine flames. Soon enough, Elizabeth was worn out from keeping the divine flames active for a long time. After she had advanced over 200 feet in the ice, she stopped to rest. "May I try?" Zen suddenly offered. Elizabeth looked at Zen in surprise. "Can you use a fire of the same level?" she asked. The flames created from godly ways couldn't melt the ice at this place. After all, they were in the blooming jade stage, stage 30 of the other shore. Any block of ice in the area was another shore token with ice attributes. "I can't, but someone else can." He communicated with the primeval Lord of Heaven in his mind, then gently waved his hand. A fire lotus bloomed in his palm. Whoosh! The fire lotus rotated gracefully as it flew towards the ice above. Hiss! It was Zhurong, the god of fire, who had summoned the fire lotus. Even if he was only an energy soul of the real Zhurong, the fire lotus still possessed compelling powers. The ice melted quickly under the fire lotus, flames, and clouds of white mist immediately enveloped the three of them. "The ice melts so fast," Elizabeth exclaimed as she looked at the rising fire lotus with astonishment. The fire lotus created a cave that was more than 200 feet long, before it gradually went out. "Let's go," Zen shouted. He rushed forward first, followed by Elizabeth and Libby. "Go." When Zen reached the end of the cave, he summoned another fire lotus in his palm. He lightly tossed the fire lotus, then it moved forward and melted another 200 feet of ice. They kept going up in this way. When Zen threw out the fifth fire lotus, the ice sheet above them suddenly cracked. Zzzztttt. In the next second, a strange and shrill sound came from above. The fire lotus had penetrated the ice sheet, then strong gales of cold wind howled from above. The cold winds were quite powerful. It caught Zen, Elizabeth, and Libby off guard as they dropped a certain distance. It was like a huge, invisible hand had slapped them. Among them, Zen dropped the shortest length, followed by Elizabeth, while Libby dropped the most. Fortunately, the cold winds only raged for 3 seconds before the broken ice sheet froze again. After the opening was blocked, the cold winds were gone. "Such strong winds, the upper ice field is truly worthy of its reputation," Zen remarked with a smile. He was fully covered in white frost, and so were Elizabeth and Libby. Chapter 3327, Cold Prisons. Libby couldn't help but sigh dejectedly. "If it's already awfully cold at the entrance, how much colder will it be above? I can't imagine what that'll be like," she said while shivering slightly. However, Elizabeth merely shrugged indifferently. "To be honest, this is not the coldest place yet. You will know when you get up there." "Really? But it's already freezing cold in here. Is this really how we will get up there?" Zen looked at her questioningly. There was no doubt that if they climbed to the upper ice field without any preparation, even Zen would be frozen. Elizabeth shook her head. "What? Of course not." She seemed like she had some sort of trick up her sleeve. She stretched out her arm for them to see. As they looked at it, a small ring instantly appeared on her wrist. Obviously, this ring was the Sumeru space. Buzz. It began to vibrate slightly. As the ring emitted a flash of light, a circular shield appeared in her hand. "This is the Divine Fire Shield. It is a treasure forged by the fire spirit of the element spirit race. Under the protection of this shield, we can move safely around the area above, explained Elizabeth. Obviously, Emperor Charm had obtained a great deal of benefits from the element spirit race when he joined them. He didn't seem to need this divine fire shield. Therefore, he gave it to Elizabeth instead. It was a good thing he did because this would be a great help in crossing the upper ice field. Elizabeth began floating towards Zen. As soon as she passed by him, she had released the divine flames of the Sun Crow race on her fingertips. The divine flames started flowing upward and all over the divine fire shield. The heat coming from the entirety of the shield radiated towards them and gave them warmth. The temperature of the divine fire shield itself was not that high. However, it was able to control the temperature within a certain range. Stay close to me. We'll climb up quickly. Get ready. Here we go, Elizabeth said. Bang! Under the protection of the divine fire shield, the three of them dashed upward together. They broke through the ice-cold hole that was now starting to freeze over. After a while, the trio finally arrived at the upper ice field. They made it with almost no problem at all. Whoosh, whoosh, suddenly they heard a loud swishing sound. They encountered a fierce cold wind that blew over them. It was quite powerful and should not be taken lightly. It almost overturned the divine fire shield. Hold on, Elizabeth's facial expression changed. If the divine fire shield was blown away by this monstrous wind, their fate would be sealed. They could already imagine getting frozen to death in this icy wasteland. Without second thought, Zen immediately clasped the divine fire shield in his hands with lightning speed. He gripped it as tightly as he could. No matter how hard the cold wind blew, the divine fire shield did not budge at all. It remained covering the three of them. Elizabeth breathed a sigh of relief. If Zen hadn't reacted quickly, the shield would have overturned. Let's keep moving forward. She motioned them to follow her. Over there on the left, you can see the line that marks the end of the ice field. As long as we continue to walk along the line, we should be on the right way. Quote. The area of blooming jade stage was quite immense. Even though the path Elizabeth had chosen was considered relatively safe, it still was not that easy to cross. The only thing they encountered in the boundless ice field was the cold bitter wind that blew hard. Other than the vast blue and white ice field, they couldn't see anything else. Not even a single snowflake was in sight. Every 5 minutes, the red light on the divine fire shield would start to dim. In addition to that, the temperature under the shield would also plummet. Every time this would happen, Elizabeth would send a divine flame toward the divine fire shield with just a slight flick of her finger. The light of the divine fire shield would once again become bright. A few hours had already passed since the three of them had made their way above the ice field. However, all they could see in front of them was just pure white space. They couldn't see the way in front of them or the way they had passed. We can't just keep going on like this. It's too slow and we're wasting too much time already, Zen said impatiently. Can't we just fly over? He asked because he knew Elizabeth was able to fly. However, she merely shook her head when she heard Zen's suggestion. The situation on the ice field is completely different from what you actually see. There are some extremely cold and turbulent currents up in the air that are invisible. If we ever get caught up in those currents, even the divine fire shield won't be able to protect us. Seeing the serious look on Elizabeth's face, Zen just gave up on that idea. All he could do now was to keep moving forward under the shield. After they had walked for another 16 hours, the cold wind gradually stopped. Without the sound of the wind, the place was so quiet. It was such a deafening silence. The cold wind has stopped blowing. Zen noticed this immediately. He looked around him through the shield. He couldn't feel the wind anymore. Elizabeth merely shrugged. Well, that's because the temperature is much lower here than where we were before. It was common knowledge that as the temperature reached an extremely low point, any kind of energy would become almost stagnant. The cold wind on the ice field was also considered as a powerful energy. Hey, Zen, look, what's that over there? Libby had been quietly observing the area around them all along. She already knew that it would be very cold on the blooming jade stage. However, never in her dreams did she think that the upper ice field would be like this. Northwest of their current location, they saw a portion of the ice field sinking for a few dozen feet. It seemed like there was nothing in that area at all. However, they felt that this zone exuded a particularly huge pressure. Zen stared at the area that Libby pointed out. Then, his facial expression was filled with utter curiosity. Instinctively, he grabbed the divine fire shield and tried to move towards that area. No, wait, don't go there. Elizabeth hurriedly pulled the divine fire shield. She said, that's a cold prison. Don't go there. A cold prison, what is that? Zen raised his eyebrows. He had never heard of that before. Elizabeth nodded. The temperature in there is much lower than that of where we are standing right now. That makes it the third coldest place on the entire other shore. She began discharging a divine flame of the sun crow race upon her fingertips and turned it into a small flame arrow. She shot the flame arrow made of incredibly condensed heat towards the cold prison. Whoosh! It soared directly towards the cold prison. Strangely enough, the flame arrow suddenly stopped the moment it entered the cold prison. The arrow seemed like it was hovering steadily and slowly. Even the flame on it was flickering very slowly as well. The flame arrow looks oddly peculiar, mumbled Zen as he stared at the arrow. He thought that if the cold prison was truly extremely cold, then the flame arrow should have been extinguished right away. In this case, the flame didn't go out immediately. Instead, it actually looked like it was burning really slowly. Believe it or not, the flame arrow has already been extinguished, explained Elizabeth. But due to the extremely low temperature of the cold prison, time has been oddly distorted inside. The flame arrow that you see floating slowly right now is merely a mirage. Whenever something had reached an extreme level, it was usually enough to render some parts of the basic rules ineffective. As the coldness reached its absolute limit, the properties of many things would also change. Sizzle. After the flame arrow floated for a few seconds, it suddenly burned brightly. In a split second, the entire cold prison was filled with firelight. Nevertheless, the firelight just flashed quickly and disappeared without a trace. The moment the firelight illuminated the cold prison, Zen noticed some light dots with strange shapes that appeared inside it. Those light dots were randomly distributed and they looked very similar to the light dots in the abstruse energy world. So those light dots are. Just as Zen was about to ask, Elizabeth began to explain. So far, we still don't know what those light dots are. But I have heard from Emperor Charm that there are some things imprisoned here. That is why these areas on the ice field are called cold prisons. Simply put, the cold prisons on stage 30 actually imprisoned the creatures from the abstruse energy world. It was too bad that Jeffrey had been left in the deleting space. If he was here, Zen would be able to ask him to tell what these light dots were. Driven by his absolute curiosity, Zen also flicked a few flames towards the cold prison. He observed them carefully just as he did earlier. As soon as the flames entered the cold prison, they all floated slowly like Elizabeth's flame arrow. Then with a flash of firelight, they disappeared too. After trying several more times, Zen continued to move forward under the divine fire shield. Soon enough, he discovered that there were cold prisons everywhere on the upper ice field. The densely packed cold prisons looked like they were holes that had been dug by worms. They had cut the originally sleek ice surface into many parts. Chapter 3328, The Core of the Heavenly Obsession Civilization. They had to step carefully since, according to Elizabeth, the cold prisons were horrible and dangerous. Fortunately, the prisons were special. The temperature inside was indeed extremely low, but it would not hurt them even if they got very close. Did you say that the cold prisons are not the coldest, but the third coldest? Zen asked, questioning how that could be true. From what he had seen just now, it seemed the temperature inside was already low to the extreme. Under such a temperature, even time and space had undergone a qualitative change. He found it hard to imagine an environment that could be colder than that. You will soon see the second coldest place, said Elizabeth. But the place with the lowest temperature on the other shore is said to be on stage 33. I have only heard of it, never seen it. I'll soon see the second coldest place. Zen repeated to himself, trying to restrain his curiosity. He walked slowly on the path between the cold prisons, under the protection of the divine fire shield. It took them about an hour to pass through the low-lying area filled with cold prisons, and then, a huge frozen structure appeared before Zen. A temple, Zen wondered as he looked at it closely. It could be, but no one can be sure, Elizabeth replied, shrugging her shoulders. It looked like a frozen temple, but its style was very unique in that it looked more like a huge metal box than a traditional temple. What civilization would construct a temple like this? Libby asked, shaking her head in confusion and astonishment. Has anyone explored this temple before? Zen asked. Elizabeth shook her head, looked carefully at the ice on the outer layer. Zen stared at it for a while and then raised his eyebrows slightly at what he discovered. This layer of ice gave off a great deal of pressure, somewhat similar to that of the cold prisons. This box has the second lowest temperature, Elizabeth said indifferently. In a cold prison, it would take almost all the water in a sea to create a thumb-sized ice cube. Look over there. Not far away, on the left, was a very special-looking cold prison. The others were empty, but this cold prison held a small ice cube the size of a thumb in the center. Zen's jaw dropped slightly as he thought of what Elizabeth had just said. That ice cube is. It used to have the same amount of water as that in the whole Bright Sea province, Elizabeth said before Zen could finish his words. Within the Bright Sea province was an island and a city, and the rest was all sea. A whole sea condensed to only a thumb-sized cube. Then the ice around this huge metal box. Libby took a deep breath as she spoke. It would take an enormous amount of water to condense it to surround this metal box. How could there be so much water in this world? Zen asked, utterly astounded and dumbfounded. Elizabeth smiled and revealed, that mystery is still unsolved. Or at least the element spirit race could not solve it. The other shore had many similar mysteries and secrets spread throughout. The element spirit civilization had been active on the other shore for more than 1,000 chaotic eras, yet they still hadn't been able to figure it out. Zen nodded and moved around the metal box under the shield. He had felt a sense of familiarity when he first saw this metal box. Its shape was very similar to that of the civilization artifact of the Heavenly Obsession civilization. But the shape was quite simple and common, so it wasn't strange that they looked alike. He decided not to say anything in the end. But then, just as Zen and the others walked from behind the metal box to the front, the primeval Lord of Heaven's voice suddenly rang out. Zen, the civilization artifact of the Heavenly Obsession civilization has issued a task again. Zen was slightly stunned to hear this. The Heavenly Obsession civilization had been issuing tasks tirelessly, but Zen was not interested in receiving any of them and thus ignored them. However, ever since the primeval Lord of Heaven had entered his inner world, a person had been sent specifically to guard the civilization artifact. This person classified and recorded every task issued by the civilization artifact. The recorder was never tired of the work, recording all tasks and classifying them according to different levels, heaven level, earth level, first class, second class and so on. He recorded everything, not missing a word, and then meticulously reported them to the primeval Lord of Heaven. Today, the Heavenly Obsession civilization had suddenly issued a task. Special task. Return to the core of the Heavenly Obsession civilization. Reward. Nothing. This strange task stunned the recorder. The tasks issued were never the same. The level and class of the tasks, as well as the reward that would be offered for completing them, would be announced clearly. Now, the civilization aircraft suddenly issued such an unusual task, which baffled the recorder. The primeval Lord of Heaven had also warned him that he should report anything unusual to him immediately. This was one of those cases, and so the recorder hurriedly reported it to the primeval Lord of Heaven, who then promptly brought it to Zen's attention. Special task. Return to the core of the Heavenly Obsession civilization. Zen's face twisted strangely at what he had just learned. If this was what was now put before him, then the Heavenly Obsession civilization must have something to do with this huge metal box. Was this the core of the Heavenly Obsession civilization? Finally, Zen, Elizabeth and Libby made it to the front of the box. Just then, something began to change. A speck of red light flickered dimly on the metal box. It spread from the bottom to the top of the metal box, which then began trembling vaguely. What's happening? This switched Elizabeth's expression dramatically. This huge metal box had stood on the upper ice field for countless years. No one had even gotten close to it, let alone seen it move. The sudden change had startled her. Crack, the ice on the surface of the metal box cracked. If a thumb-sized ice cube would require the water of a sea to be condensed into it, one could only imagine the kind of power needed to break such thick ice. Retreat, hurry. An ice block the size of a fist fell from above and crashed into the ice field. Crack. This highly condensed ice block held an amount of water equivalent to a huge sea the size of several provinces. The upper ice field was unable to support it at all. The ice block smashed right into it, penetrating the thick layer of ice, and smashing into the lower ice field. Luckily, this area on the lower ice field was unpopulated. The ice block had not fallen on any living creatures. The only damage caused was a small pit in the ground, left by the ice block before it disappeared without a trace. Many more ice blocks fell similarly. To be safe, Zen, Elizabeth and Libby had all retreated. A long while later, most of the blocks of ice at the front of the metal box had fallen off. A dark red light silently began glowing to reveal the outline of a door. It has a door. Does that mean we can go inside? Elizabeth was overtaken by excitement. She had passed by here many times and had always regarded this place as forbidden and not to be approached. Anyone who witnessed this sudden change would be as excited as she now was. Chapter 3329, Two Civilizations. Elizabeth had always been careful ever since she set foot on the upper ice field, but now she was finally feeling a little bit radical. Come on, let's go over there and have a look. she excitedly said to the other two. At this moment, however, Zen became extremely cautious and wary. Wait a moment, there are still some ice blocks that haven't fallen off. It's not a joke when you get hit by these ice blocks. As soon as he finished speaking, another large chunk of hard transparent ice fell from above. With a clash, it created a massive hole in the ice field. The three of them waited at a distance for some more time. They didn't continue their slow approach until there was a clear sign that there would no longer be any solid ice falling. The door outlined by the light was still closed like before. Fearing that the metal box would be too cold to touch, Elizabeth immediately released a divine flame of the Sun Crow race. The divine flame was burning the surface of the metal box, but it did not extinguish quickly. It was like any ordinary flame, burning for a while before it quietly dwindled. There is no problem with the metal box, but how can we get in? Elizabeth asked as she shook her head. Look, it seems that the center of the door is somewhat sunken, said Libby, who was by their side. Zen and Elizabeth shifted their eyes to the center of the door at the same time. It was not until Libby pointed out that they noticed that the center of the black metal door was indeed sunken. I wonder, what can be put in this sunken area? Elizabeth asked. She looked really confused. However, Zen's heart skipped a beat at that same moment. Judging from the size and shape of the sunken area, it was completely the same with the size and shape of the civilization artifact of the Heavenly Obsession civilization. It seemed that the movement of this huge metal box had something to do with the civilization artifact under his control. I think I may know, Zen said with a smirk. Elizabeth and Libby curiously looked at Zen at the same time. Of course, the two girls hadn't imagined that all of this had been caused by Zen. Buzz. It was still a little troublesome to take out another shore token that had already been carried before. After Zen prepared for a little while, a metal cubic box appeared in his hand. This box. It seems to be just the right size. Libby's and Elizabeth's eyes abruptly lit up with excitement. Zen pushed the civilization artifact into the sunken area. The civilization artifact perfectly fitted and matched with the sunken area. Buzz. Then, the red light around the door became brighter. With a click, the civilization artifact bounced out, and the black door automatically opened. It's open, Elizabeth said in disbelief. Things went on almost unimaginably smoothly. It was as if the path of the upper ice field was made specifically for Zen. After absorbing the civilization artifact into his inner world, Zen was cautious enough to not rush into the metal box immediately. Like Elizabeth, he released a fire column first to test the temperature inside the metal box. After the fire column went inside, the temperature did not change that much. Only then did Zen enter with the shield for caution. The inside of the metal box was pitch black as if it was an unending void. Rays of green light could be seen, which made the inside of the metal box look like there were little snakes wandering along the wall. Libby looked around and asked curiously, this metal box is not a temple. It's simply an empty house. What's the use of an empty house like this? Elizabeth shook her head as if she was saying that she didn't know the answer to Libby's question. She had also never encountered a thing like this before. Zen was quietly observing the faint light that was flowing on the wall. At the same time, he was also paying close attention to the civilization artifact in his inner world. You have completed the task of entering the core of Heavenly Obsession Civilization, and your reward for this is the activation of the core of Heavenly Obsession Civilization. Buzz. When the civilization artifact made this sound, the number of rays of green light on the wall greatly increased. As thousands of rays of green light flowed on the wall, the entire metal box was immediately reflecting in an eerie green glow. Elizabeth and Libby warily looked around as they squeezed beside Zen with nervous expressions on their faces. If there was a trap, then they would all be doomed. Not to mention other things, but even if a cold prison covered them, they would all be frozen to their core. Don't be afraid. Being squeezed by the two girls, Zen was at a loss for words. He could only say, it's me who activated the light. You. Elizabeth was stunned by what Zen said. Yes, this place is called the core of Heavenly Obsession Civilization. It was left behind by the Heavenly Obsession Civilization, said Zen. So, what's the use of this place then? Elizabeth inquired again. Zen just shook his head and said, I haven't figured out that part either. Just as the two of them were discussing, a ray of light suddenly shot out from a wall right in front of them. The light swept across Elizabeth, Zen, and Libby. Then a green shadow slowly appeared on the wall in front of them. Judging from the curvaceous silhouette, it should be a shadow of a human woman. Its size and form were actually remarkably similar to that of Elizabeth. When Zen looked at the green figure from head to toe, it suddenly spoke in a tuneful voice. Hello. This voice was incredibly special. It was neither a voice of a woman nor a man, neither a voice of a child nor an elder. It sounded as if there were multiple people, males and females, young and old, speaking at the same time. Judging by the sound ray alone, it was terribly like the civilization artifact of the heavenly obsession civilization. "Who are you?" Zen asked gently. "Me." The green figure was deep in thought for a moment. "I'm a consciousness created by the heavenly obsession civilization." "A consciousness that was created? Are you a soul fragment?" Zen asked curiously. The primeval Lord of Heaven, who was listening in Zen's inner world, also had a strange look on his face. With the Thurges on the other shore, all sorts of things could be created. However, a consciousness could never be created. Just like what Zen thought, he also thought that the green figure was a soul fragment. "No, I am not a soul fragment. I am not attached to anyone. I am an independent individual and I was created," the green figure replied affirmatively. Obviously, it understood what a soul fragment was, but it didn't think it was a soul fragment. Zen was still a little confused at what the green figure was saying. He could only make it clear if he asked it from another perspective, "So you are not a living creature but a puppet?" "I am not a puppet either. Give me a moment to think about how I can explain it to you more clearly." The light that formed the green figure flickered and then suddenly disappeared. All the rays of green light in front of them lined up, forming a protective green curtain. A moment later, the green curtain began to emit other colors. Then, a picture appeared in front of them. It was a picture of three people in another completely different world. When the three of them saw this scene, shock and disbelief appeared on their faces. "What is this? Isn't this an illusion?" Elizabeth excitedly exclaimed in astonishment. "I am not sure, but it seems to be a scene formed by scrolling pictures," Libby said. Zen nodded his head, then said, "All of the scenes are made up by constantly changing the light. I've never heard of this means before. All kinds of illusions and magic arrays in chaos were very ordinary Thurges. Now, countless rays of light constantly changed to reflect complicated scenes." In the eyes of Zen, Elizabeth, and Libby, it was a difficult and thankless thing to see. Even if it could be done, it was meaningless to do so. "The means may seem very difficult for you to do, but it's extremely simple for us," the green figure said. At this moment, a primitive land appeared on the curtain, and many small insects were born on that land. At the same time, the green figure spoke again with its eerie voice. "The heavenly obsession civilization was actually the second chaotic era we have experienced. The experiences in that round of chaos have been annihilated in history. But I think you must have heard of the first chaotic era we have experienced. That was the calculation civilization." Chapter 3330, the civilization made up of insects. Zen had long since heard of the calculation civilization. They were the ones who advocated for another way to complete the finale way. Instead of relying on the other shore, the calculation civilization completely abandoned that strategy and used their own understanding of space, time, and energy to carry out the finale way. It was said that they almost succeeded, but that claim was never confirmed since very little trace of their culture and history remained, which was why not a lot of civilizations believed they were able to almost complete the finale way. Despite that, however, the primeval Lord of Heaven still acutely learned this. He put the information about the energy shaft into the 6-pattern blood-storing tree. The Pear Hill finally chose to let Yan cultivate the energy shaft. In the chaotic source world, she had used it once. However, it was worth noting that the energy shaft she wielded was only rudimentary. The real energy shaft could alter time, space, and energy freely. Its power was unimaginably great. Elizabeth and Libby did not have much of a reaction towards the green figure. Libby had never heard of the calculation civilization or the heavenly obsession civilization before. Elizabeth knew a bit about them but never really thought highly of them. She only felt curious, at most, as to how exactly such an unknown civilization lived in 2 rounds of chaos and built a temple here. Zen shared their thoughts. "A civilization can only go through one chaotic era. How could you be able to go through 2? He remarked in mild disbelief. It was the primeval Lord of Heaven who made Zen ask the question. In order to sow the seeds of the human race, the primeval Lord of Heaven paid a heavy price, and it was only by taking advantage of the opportunity when the chaotic era moved on to the next one was he able to succeed. For the heavenly obsession civilization to have served as a ruling civilization in 2 chaotic eras was unheard of. Because we discovered the method of passing down our civilization, the green being answered. As it spoke, numerous insects hatched on the wall in front of Zen. These insects were life fireflies, emitting flickering lights that danced all around them. "Our civilization is different from other civilizations," the green figure continued. These are our real forms. Zen nodded in understanding, his expression unchanged. It was very common for insects to form civilizations. At least the regal jade civilization and the metal civilization were both rarer compared to this collective of light-emitting insects. In our calculation civilization, male members release red light while female members release green. As the green figure continued to explain, the insects flew around and lined up in an orderly way. Dots of red and green light paired up with each other. As the insects bonded, red and green light began to flash constantly. The sight of these lights puzzled Zen. What on earth is this? He muttered in amazement. It wasn't just him. Both Elizabeth and Libby were equally, if not more, confused. This is a calculation method, the green figure answered. You humans have 10 fingers and calculate with the decimal system, but for us, we count by 2 colors, red and green, with the binary system. This talk about counting methods confused Zen, but the primeval Lord of Heaven appeared above him and directly asked his question. What is the advantage of this binary system? Advantage, the green figure repeated. The advantage is that we have unparalleled calculation ability. With this revelation, the scene before them began to change. Tens of thousands, millions, hundreds of millions. Red and green lined up together and flickered continuously. As the insects gathered together, they calculated the results and communicated with each other. Such a special method of calculation. The primeval Lord of Heaven exclaimed with excitement. Just how powerful is it? It can easily decipher Sanskrit words, the green figure replied. When the primeval Lord of Heaven heard this, his expression changed. For so many years, Jeffrey was the only one he knew who was able to decipher Sanskrit words with his inborn ability. The boy was just able to understand the words naturally. The calculation civilization's method was completely different. They deciphered Sanskrit words through terrifying calculation. As a result, the Sanskrit words, which might be secrets to others, were nothing mysterious to them. It was through their faultless calculation method that the civilization was able to decipher all Sanskrit words and evolved at such a fast pace. If that's the case, then why does nobody know of your civilization? The primeval Lord of Heaven asked. He had a point. Such an advanced ruling civilization would have definitely left marks on the other shore, not unverifiable rumors. Zen couldn't help but nod in agreement. Ha ha. To their surprise, the green figure laughed. We're too small, even smaller than the tiniest mosquito in your world. It's difficult for individuals in our civilization to increase their strength all alone. It was indeed true. The insects were incredibly small, just like the indecipherable grains of sand on a beach. A civilization of micro-individuals would have trouble producing powerful existences. Don't be mistaken though, even if we are small, we still have the means to cultivate. An individual's strength may not be that impressive, but together. Countless insects began to appear and flash a barrage of lights on the wall. These insects combined in a special way to form an indomitable force that could fight against ferocious beasts in that chaotic era. Alone, they were weak, but together, they could be unstoppable. Thus, the calculation civilization cultivated as a unit. This was the same method number 9527 adopted inside the chaos ancient god Gerald's mind. Each soul fragment had a mind of its own, but combined, they formed a complete whole. Soon enough, our calculation civilization became the ruling civilization in the chaos. Like other ruling civilizations, we also wanted to complete the finale way. We climbed towards the higher stages of the other shore step by step until we saw the starry sky. This description was understood by both Zen and the primeval Lord of Heaven. The green figure was no doubt talking about the abstruse energy world. Libby, however, was confused. What starry sky? It seemed the more she listened, the less she was actually able to learn since she couldn't understand anything. I think it's the starry sky of stage 33. The one that leads to a world outside the chaos, Zen explained. Have you ever been there? She asked. How do you know about it? Wait, since you know about it, that means you have been there, right? Am I right? She asked, throwing out a series of questions but did not give Zen the chance to answer any. A trace of helplessness appeared on his face. I'll tell you later. This exchange was ignored by the primeval Lord of Heaven, who had more questions for the green figure. Can you also understand what is in that starry sky through calculation? He asked. So long as our calculation ability is powerful and advanced enough, then we can understand everything in the starry sky. In fact, we almost achieved such a feat, the green figure answered. Chapter 3331, The Remarkable Calculation Ability. An expression of surprise flashed across the primeval Lord of Heaven's face. You have already made it. Buzz. Just then, a light shadow appeared on the wall again. The figure formed by the light shadow seemed to be a complex, futuristic craft. Although the size of our members is already small, we are still not small enough. The green figure continued to explain, after we had processed the sand, we were able to display a stronger calculation ability. However, it took us more than half of the chaotic era to obtain this method. The complicated craft slowly morphed into black boxes, quite similar to the Heavenly Obsession civilization artifact that Zen had fused with. Such a powerful thing is actually made of sand. The primeval Lord of Heaven sighed. Meanwhile, the green figure was not concerned with the primeval Lord of Heaven's exclamation. It knew that their calculation civilization was such a unique existence. While the form on the wall transformed, a world of ice and snow appeared on its surface. This is the blooming jade stage, Libby finally voiced out. She knew what she was talking about, especially because she had passed through the blooming jade stage just now. Yes, the green figure responded. If you came from the upper ice field, you would have noticed the light dots distributed in the cold prisons. Zen nodded in agreement. That must be from the abstruse energy world. The scene on the wall quickly switched to a cold prison, and then the black boxes reappeared. As the green light on the boxes flashed, an illusory outline formed and glowed with green as well. It seemed that the light spots in the cold prison were confirmed by the extremely high-speed calculation. It was during the presenting process of the wall picture that the green figure murmured words about the calculation. These most probably would have to be the unique words of the calculation civilization. Though Zen and the primeval Lord of Heaven could not decipher those words, they assumed the calculation civilization had the ability to restore the things in the abstruse energy world by means of quick calculations. All of a sudden, a deformed, odd monster curled up in the cold prison. It was imprisoned in the cold prison, but was not dead. The picture showed its eyes that blinked a couple times. The monster is still alive. Elizabeth gasped. A trace of fear rose in her heart when she thought of the cold prisons she had passed by just now. Yes, most of them are alive. Only a few died, the green figure acknowledged. Do the monsters in the cold prisons belong to the instant civilization? The primeval Lord of Heaven asked. No, the green figure heaved out a huge sigh. Like most human beings and other ambitious civilizations, the Heavenly Obsession civilization was on the hunt for the instant civilization and the meaning of its existence. Since you can see through the world outside the chaos, why haven't you discovered the real way to complete the finale way? The primeval Lord of Heaven continued to ask. It's not like we haven't tried. We have considered many methods, including using powerful other shore tokens, the green figure replied. When the primeval Lord of Heaven heard about the other shore tokens, his eyes lit up. We human beings have collected the other shore tokens within stage 33 of the other shore, such as. The green figure listened intently as the primeval Lord of Heaven explained. When he finished, the green figure couldn't help but smile. You must have failed, right? They did. If they had succeeded, we wouldn't even be here right now, Elizabeth spat. The green figure shook its head. I didn't draw the conclusion through this. It is because we have calculated the power needed to put up against that needle. The primeval Lord of Heaven scoffed. You figured out how much strength is needed? Yes. The green figure continued, around 161 million divine megatons. Zen, Libby, Elizabeth and the primeval Lord of Heaven took a deep breath after they heard this answer. Elizabeth and Zen only had the power of tens of thousands of divine megatons as of the moment. Plus, if the power of hundreds of thousands of divine megatons was released, that would be terrifying to be around. Considering the amount of power needed, there was no way they could succeed and make it out alive. There was no telling what such a formidable force could do. That's impossible, the primeval Lord of Heaven expressed, shaking his head. In the past, when the human ancestor used his strongest method, he sacrificed himself by releasing over 9 million divine megatons of force. He almost succeeded in completing the finale way. Zen was inclined to believe his words. When he saw King Manard and the human race on the other shore, he had learned that the human race had almost completed the finale way. Over 9 million divine megatons of force was already so threatening, but it was nowhere near the power of 161 million divine megatons. However, the green figure couldn't care less about the primeval Lord of Heaven's reaction. We've collected much information regarding stage 33 of the other shore. Taking into account of all the existing other shore tokens, we calculated the greatest possible power we could obtain, which is 9,730,000 divine megatons. I wonder if your ancestor used the same amount of power. The primeval Lord of Heaven was stunned to hear this, and his eyes widened in shock. Previously, when they saw that the calculation civilization consisted of a bunch of insects, the primeval Lord of Heaven and Zen looked down upon them. After all, what could a bunch of tiny insects do? It was at this moment that the primeval Lord of Heaven believed these insects developed a powerful civilization on their own. They calculated anything correctly. Just then, the primeval Lord of Heaven recalled that before the human ancestor sacrificed himself, his voice echoed throughout the entire starry region. Today, I will do my best to complete this. With the burning of all these tokens, I will unleash the terrifying power of 9,730,000 divine megatons. The calculation civilization had never obtained these other shore tokens before, but they could calculate the amount of power so accurately. The primeval Lord of Heaven could not believe that. The things left behind on the other shore seem mysterious, but they prove to be mere illusory traps which lure rounds of civilizations into them. They all assume that they could complete the finale way, the green figure said. But no matter what you do, even your most perfect plan won't get you through the finale way. Convinced, the primeval Lord of Heaven nodded at the green figure with great reverence. However, his eyes gleamed with an ounce of hope. So what method can be used to complete the finale way? The energy shaft, the figure responded. Only the energy shaft can transform endless power. In the past, when the calculation civilization discovered they couldn't complete the finale way relying on the other shore, they came up with different methods to do so. So far, the energy shaft was the most promising one. Chapter 3332, The Failure of the Heavenly Obsession Civilization. According to the calculation civilization's assumption, the energy shaft's transformation ability was virtually infinite. In theory, after mastering the completed energy shaft, one would then possess infinite power. Not to mention the power of about 160 million divine megatons, even the power of 1 billion divine megatons could be transformed and released. It's such a pity that in the period of the calculation civilization, the end of the chaotic era arrived when plan of using energy shaft finalized. We couldn't set it in motion at the time, the green figure remarked. So instead, you shared the method to obtain the energy shaft, right? Asked the primeval Lord of Heaven. Yes, replied the green figure. Back then, we were in despair, so we placed our hope on other civilizations. Many other ruling civilizations on the other shore had the tendency to exclude other races. They believed that anyone not part of their own race would be disloyal. They were vigilant and always on guard against other races. And so after many ruling civilizations on the other shore set up their own temples, it grew difficult for them to advance to higher levels. Some of the rules and theurgies they grasped were hidden in the temples as treasures. At the time, they weren't willing to spread them out. However, the calculation civilization was very open-minded. They hoped that other civilizations could do what they failed to. Unfortunately, most of the later civilizations regarded the energy shaft as merely an untouchable thing. Many civilizations grew skeptical of it. In truth, the primeval Lord of Heaven also felt that the energy shaft was an unreachable kind of fantasy. But the plan was feasible, in the end. And so he stuffed it into 6-pattern blood-storing tree before passing it on to this chaotic era. Unfortunately, not a single civilization believed in us. We could only rely on ourselves. And so we opened the second chaotic era, the Heavenly Obsession Civilization, said the green figure. I want to know how you opened the second chaotic era, asked the primeval Lord of Heaven. After all, the Heavenly Obsession Civilization owned the civilization artifact, so it should have also been a highly prosperous ruling civilization. The situation likely differed from the human race's current situation. Naturally, the primeval Lord of Heaven was rather curious about it. Our control over life should go beyond your comprehension, continued the green figure. Our bodies are small, so perhaps we're at an advantage. At the micro level, we found many sources of life, along with the things that make up these sources. As it spoke, a small ball appeared on the wall. It changed from 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8, and so on. As it continued splitting, it became a densely packed group of small balls that formed many young lives. On the picture were wolves, elephants, and all sorts of strange beasts. Is life formed by these small balls? What about our human race? Libby's eyes widened in curiosity. They also form human beings, replied the green figure. How is that possible? Libby couldn't help but shake her head in disbelief. Now, I can make a scene so you can take a look. Soon after, the picture on the wall returned to a single small ball, similar to the previous picture. As it continued splitting, countless small balls were formed, each then turning into an extremely young individual, the human embryo. The embryo grew rapidly until it became a baby waiting for delivery. Zen, Elizabeth, and Libby were all amazed. The primeval Lord of Heaven, on the other hand, seemed rather calm and unsurprised. It wasn't particularly difficult to observe the process of a baby's growth, but the primeval Lord of Heaven didn't expect the baby to form from a tiny ball. What he wanted to know was how the calculation civilization ended up becoming the heavenly obsession civilization. As you can see, all the creatures are formed by small balls after they split. So long as the information inside the original ball is modified, we're likely to get our desired results, the green figure said. The primeval Lord of Heaven's expression shifted slightly as he asked, "Then you've revised it?" "Yes," it said faintly. "We modified the balls at the beginning of another chaotic era. When the balls split, the race they formed turned out to be our calculation civilization. We were rich in experience and time, so we thought we could easily realize the plan of energy shaft. However, we underestimated the power of the Sons of Truth and the strength of the element spirit race." The green figure's voice seemed rather lonely and disappointed. On the other shore, the calculation civilization had always kept a low profile. Who would pay attention to a group of insects, after all? The element spirit civilization completely ignored the calculation civilization. They didn't even bother suppressing this race in the least. According to the assessment of the element spirit civilization, the latter was likely the weakest ruling civilization. The calculation civilization managed to become the ruling civilization merely because, at the time, there were no other powerful races in that round of chaos. But the appearance of the heavenly obsession civilization quickly aroused the element spirit race's vigilance. The latter found that these insects were not as simple as they seemed. After the element spirit race realized it, they began rigorously suppressing the heavenly obsession civilization. Unfortunately, the civilization that existed before the heavenly obsession civilization chose to pay allegiance to the element spirit race. And so the Sons of Truth selected in the previous civilization naturally fell under the element spirit race's command. While fighting the Sons of Truth, the heavenly obsession civilization tried creating the energy shaft. "In the end, all our efforts were in vain," said the green figure in return, shaking its head. "It didn't matter when the Sons of Truth suppressed us. Although our calculation civilization was small, our absolute strength was powerful enough to fight against them. We already managed to control those Sons of Truth in the second chaotic era. Our real problem still lies on the other shore," continued the green figure. "The plan of energy shaft required the help of the other shore. But the element spirit race was too strong for us to fight against. The ones heading for stage 33 of the other shore were too weak, so in the end, even the core of the heavenly obsession civilization was frozen. The calculation civilization was a race known to group together, they needed countless individuals to grow strong. Entering stage 33 of the other shore, one needed to enter the eternal scroll painting. Not many individuals could enter it. In the entire calculation civilization, only about 20 had entered stage 33 of the other shore. But they were individuals barely as big as mosquitoes. What was their use? At that time, you guys could cultivate to become the wild gods. Your body size shouldn't be a problem, right? Zen asked as he wondered. We were used to cultivating and fighting together. Even if we turned into huge creatures hundreds of thousands of times bigger than before, we still couldn't display our original strength, the green figure simply said. So you were focused on the energy shaft at the time. What about the ways blending energy? Zen asked further. Chapter 3333, Connection. If Zen's knowledge served him right, the ways blending energy also had great potential. However, it seemed that the heavenly obsession civilization only focused on the energy shaft. It did not mention the ways blending energy at all. The ways blending energy? The green figure asked with a faint smile. Our calculation civilization is best at blending godly ways. We even blended 3001 godly ways back then during the era of calculation civilization. But so what? That one missing godly way was never found. The green figure exclaimed. The method the calculation civilization used to blend godly ways was naturally different from what the evil god used. The evil god used his impressive talent to blend godly ways, while the calculation civilization still relied on calculation to do so. It was possible to permute and combine the 3001 godly ways in countless ways. As long as there was enough time and with a powerful calculation ability, one could find the best blending method sooner or later. In terms of the sequence and operation method, the calculation civilization had summarized a total of 6 ways to blend godly ways. You have blended 3001 godly ways? Zen asked as the corners of his eye twitched. He knew that it was very likely that the evil god had obtained the arc light energy in his hand from the heavenly obsession civilization, but what about the blood essence godly way of the regal jade civilization? Yes, and the element spirit civilization had hidden the last godly way, the green figure answered. We got this information from a Sanskrit word. Maybe the ways blending energy was the best method to complete the finale way, but we couldn't resist against the element spirit civilization. It was impossible. After it was done speaking, the regal jade spirit slowly said, I didn't expect that someone else had gone further even before our regal jade civilization. The regal jade spirit had always believed that only the Wing King had obtained the blood-red Sanskrit word. He had never imagined that someone else had already acquired the Sanskrit word and deciphered the information inside it even before the Wing King could. Furthermore, the green figure's statements matched exactly with the information Zen knew, so the green figure certainly did not talk nonsense. Therefore, Zen also told the green figure how he had obtained the blood essence godly way and the arc light energy. Then he asked, is it truly impossible to get the last godly way from the element spirit race? That godly way should be hidden in stage 33 of the other shore. Our calculation civilization can't do anything about it, unfortunately, the green figure said with a shake of its head. Maybe we can do something, Zen said with a gleam in his eyes. Ha ha, the green figure burst into laughter. It clearly didn't think that Zen could make it. At what phase is the current round of chaos? It asked again. It's almost at the end, Zen answered. Truth be told, Zen wasn't sure about the duration of the entire chaos, but he always heard that the chaos had reached the last phase ever since he had entered the source world. What a pity, the green figure muttered. With our calculation, we have already deduced and confirmed the best method to make a complete energy shaft, said the green figure. At that moment, the primeval Lord of Heaven's eyes lit up. If they could get hold of a complete energy shaft, then that would probably be the best way to complete the finale way. However, there seemed to be an issue since the green figure said, what a pity. Thus, the primeval Lord of Heaven asked, if your civilization could already make an energy shaft, then why was it a pity? It takes a long time to cultivate the embryo of an energy shaft. Since the current chaos is in the last phase, there isn't enough time, the green figure explained. The primeval Lord of Heaven frowned at this answer. He knew about the plan of the element spirit race. If the purge way succeeded, then the end of the chaos would be delayed, and there would probably be no chances anymore. Yet, Zen suddenly thought of something. What if there is a ready-made energy shaft? He asked. Ready-made? The primeval Lord of Heaven and the green figure looked at each other in confusion. Last time when the snake goddess and Fuxi visited the Oneness Sky Palace, they only discussed some important things. They hadn't told the primeval Lord of Heaven that the embryo of the energy shaft was already placed inside Yan's body. Zen nodded and proceeded to describe the energy shaft he had seen before. My sister Yan only got that energy shaft not long ago, and according to Fuxi, that was just an embryo, he added. In turn, the green figure's whole body fluctuated as if it was excited. It said, we calculation civilization never believed in fate, but it seems that fate has guided you to come here. The embryo of the energy shaft should have existed for a long time, otherwise, it couldn't merge with your sister. It was true that the energy shaft of Pear Hill was constructed a long time ago. However, there had never been a suitable object to merge with it. Thus, the snake goddess proposed to create a perfect self to merge with the energy shaft. That was why she used the 6-pattern blood-storing seed to create Yan. Can she have a complete energy shaft? Zen asked. Of course, the green figure answered. Although we've been frozen here for a while, we have always waited for an opportunity. For us, this is a once-in-a-lifetime chance, it said. The two girls, Elizabeth and Libby, were both stunned when they heard the whole conversation. Zen had already exhibited too much unknown power back in the battle between the Oneness Sky Palace and the Sun Crow race. However, it wasn't until now that they realized their knowledge of Zen was only the tip of the iceberg. Then what should I do now? Zen asked again. Take out the civilization artifact of the Heavenly Obsession civilization, the green figure replied. Then, Zen brought out the square, box-like civilization artifact from his inner world once again. Buzz. The edge of the civilization artifact began to glow with green light. Then, rays of green light also flashed around the place. It wasn't long before the green figure disappeared from the wall and in the next moment, reappeared on the civilization artifact. At the same time, it said, it is impossible to destroy the core of the Heavenly Obsession civilization, but because it was frozen, you cannot carry it. But, it can still help you since the core is now activated and connected to the civilization artifact. What can it help me do? Zen asked curiously. Calculate, the green figure replied simply. Calculation was the foundation of the calculation civilization. While Zen was still confused, the primeval Lord of Heaven gently reminded him, with the help of the heavenly obsession civilization, you can decipher Sanskrit words that you don't understand, and even the abstruse energy world. I see. Back then, he had to ask Jeffrey for help for him to read the Sanskrit words. Thus, it would be very convenient if the core of the heavenly obsession civilization could directly decipher the Sanskrit words. Can we see the creatures in the cold prisons then? He asked. Yes, the green figure confirmed. At that point, Zen put away the civilization artifact, then he and the two girls carried the divine fire shield out of the core of the heavenly obsession civilization. When they came across a cold prison, the civilization artifact released a ray of green light, which illuminated the white spots in the cold prison. Soon enough, the big core began to glow brightly. It meant that it had started to calculate at an insane speed. Chapter 3334, A Bald Giant. After the core of the heavenly obsession civilization performed more than half a minute of calculations, the civilization artifact released a green beam of light. The green light then formed a light curtain, which outlined the hideous monster in the cold prison. The monster had no head, only two round eyeballs. Its eyes blinked twice, which made it look frightening. Suddenly, a thought popped inside Zen's mind. Why can these monsters maintain their forms in the abstruse energy world? He muttered. He remembered that those monsters from the abstruse energy world he met before turned into tentacles after they entered the deleting space. It should be because of the extreme temperature. If the cold prisons were destroyed, then those light dots would return to their original forms, the green figure explained. But why are they sealed off here? Elizabeth asked. Her eyes were filled with curiosity as she observed them. She had passed by this place several times, and she felt awkward when she thought about how the monsters stared at her every time she was around. I don't know, the green figure said and shook its head. The cold prisons already existed when we built the core of the heavenly obsession civilization here, but at that time, there weren't so many of them, it mumbled. Back then, there were only over 100 cold prisons surrounding the core of the heavenly obsession civilization. Now, there were potholes everywhere, and there were tens of thousands of cold prisons. Maybe the element spirit civilization captured and locked them here for study, said Libby, who stood beside them. That's possible, Zen agreed and nodded. When the calculation civilization had managed to see the original appearance of the monsters, they also tried to communicate with them. If the monsters were intelligent beings, then the calculation civilization could obtain information about the abstruse energy world from them. Therefore, they tried every way they could, but they had failed every time. In the end, they finally gave up. Zen also planned to communicate with them but did not bother anymore when he heard about the calculation civilization's failed attempts. Despite that, he unexpectedly gained a wonderful skill after he followed Elizabeth's advice to pass through the upper ice field and activated the core of the heavenly obsession civilization. True enough, he could decipher all the Sanskrit words and see through the light dots of the abstruse energy world through the core of the heavenly obsession civilization. His new ability was immensely useful to him and the primeval Lord of Heaven. Still, the most important thing was the calculation civilization's goal was to create a real energy shaft. If Yan could control the complete energy shaft, then that would easily solve all their problems. After the core of the heavenly obsession civilization operated for a while, it stopped and became quiet. The calculation had consumed a large amount of energy. The core of the heavenly obsession civilization has been here for so many years. With the way the element spirit civilization does things, I'm afraid they will try their best to destroy it. Why did they just choose to seal it? Zen asked. They tried, but failed, the green figure said with a hint of pride. The element spirit civilization was not omnipotent. For instance, the human race's creation myth temple had stood on stage 17 for so long, but the element spirit race couldn't do anything about it. Once Zen was done asking some other questions, he continued to move towards the other end of the upper ice field under the divine fire shield. When he passed by the many large and small cold prisons, he also quietly observed them. Some of the cold prisons were quite spacious and had many light dots inside them. Zen stopped in his tracks and asked the green figure to help him decipher them. Fortunately, the core of the heavenly obsession civilization was now activated, so he could still rely on it no matter how far he was away from it or even if he was in the upper stages. Buzz! His cinnabar field released 2 rays of green light which directly entered his pupils. At that moment, he finally saw that the light dots in the cold prison in front of him were already in their original appearance. It turned out that sealed inside the cold prison was a bull-shaped monster. Next, he proceeded to advance further and observed more kinds of creatures. Elizabeth and Libby were curious and also wanted to see these creatures, so the green figure reflected the scene in their eyes. After they looked at a few strange monsters, however, they were no longer interested. As for Zen, he felt a little disappointed as he observed them. He wanted to find some traces of civilization from the monsters of the abstruse energy world, but after he had examined them for so long, it seemed that all the creatures in the cold prisons were very primitive. The three of them saw a cold prison that was 30 miles wide on the ice field when they passed through a particular area. This huge cold prison stood in front of them and blocked their way. "This cold prison is so huge," Libby exclaimed as she stared ahead. The biggest cold prison they saw before was only over 100 feet wide, and they could easily go around it. This time, the one in front of them was 30 miles wide, and it would take a lot of effort to go around it. "That's strange. This cold prison only appeared recently. I've never seen such a big one 2 years ago," Elizabeth commented. The last time she had passed through the ice field was 2 years ago, and she did not see this big cold prison at that time. "Let's see what's in this huge cold prison first," said Zen. There were numerous white dots scattered around the cold prison. Of course, the creature sealed inside it must be massive in size. Buzz. After the green light swept through the light dots, the core of the heavenly obsession civilization began to calculate again. The cold prisons Zen had previously seen were all quite small and did not contain many light dots. Thus, the core of the heavenly obsession civilization had quickly deciphered them. It only took about half a minute to complete the whole process. Meanwhile, this 30-mile wide cold prison had so many light dots inside, so it was much more complicated to calculate. It was not until about an hour later that the green light entered Zen's eyes. Buzz. His jaw dropped as soon as he saw what was inside the cold prison. He couldn't help but take 2 steps back and almost dropped the divine fire shield. Luckily, Elizabeth was quick to react and immediately caught the divine fire shield before it fell. At the same time, she asked, "What did you see? Why are you so excited?" "It's a giant," he murmured. It was a fat bald giant. The giant wore handcuffs and shackles. His bald head was down and his eyes were closed, as if he was asleep. This was the first human-shaped creature that Zen had seen, so he was naturally a little excited. Just as he was looking at the giant suddenly opened his eyes. Buzz, 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 buzz. The light spots in the cold prison fluctuated like mad. They were like countless sparks that rose when a bonfire was destroyed. The giant struggled madly in Zen's sight. Then, the giant got up and grabbed at him who was outside the cold prison. This giant could move freely inside the big cold prison. "Hold the divine fire shield tightly," he warned. Without hesitation, he held the divine fire shield and quickly retreated. In return, the giant's large hands stretched out from the cold prison and grabbed at their heads. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, Zen had retreated about 4,000 feet with the protection of the divine fire shield. Thankfully, there was no cold prison behind them. If there was, then the consequences were unimaginable. Chapter 3335, Unable to Communicate. It all happened so suddenly that Elizabeth and Libby barely had any time to react. All they saw were light dots fluttering by like restless fireflies, and then a pair of giant hands reached out to grab their heads. Fortunately, Zen's superior reactions came to their rescue. Over and over again, the giant hands were only inches from them. The girls felt incredibly unsafe and in serious danger. But it all happened as quick as a flash and their astonishment didn't last long. When they had come to their senses, the giant hands had extended to their limit. Dark cyan chain was wrapped tightly around the wrists of the giant hands, tingling and clanging. At the same time, a rhythmic tune could be heard coming from the cold prison. It was as melodious and pleasant to the ears as singing, yet a hint of anger was clearly hidden within. "That sound is very similar to the one from the Soul Cloud in the Soul City," Libby remarked. Zen nodded in agreement. It had been many years since Elizabeth had passed through the Soul City and so this had not occurred to her immediately. But Zen and Libby had just come from the Soul City and so it was still fresh in their minds. Bang, 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 quote, the pair of giant hands slapped down on the ice, sending waves of ice shards flying through the air with every slam. They shot in all directions and flew like invisible weapons, one of them hitting Elizabeth in the arm. Even though she had already stepped in the Holy Soul realm, the ice fragment still pierced her skin, causing her to let out a muffled groan. "Get behind me." Zen turned the divine fire shield around and stood in front of the girls to block them from the ice fragments. The giant slapped the ground a dozen times before he finally tired himself out. Such a terribly cold environment affected the giant as well. Due to this, a layer of white frost had condensed on the surface of his skin. Clapping the ice violently had actually created about a dozen cracks across his arms. The pair of giant hands then slowly retracted into the cold prison. To Elizabeth's and Libby's eyes, the hands turned to a stack of incomprehensible white light dots as they retracted. The bald giant seems afraid of the cold too, but why isn't the extremely low temperature in the cold prison affecting him? Zen asked. The temperature in the cold prison could almost not go any lower. Any creature sucked into it should die. According to Zen's observations in the deleting space, the creatures in the abstruse energy world were not immortal. It's their form. Their form allows them to avoid the damage of the low temperature, the green figure replied. The abstruse energy state was different from the rest. If one wanted to destroy them in the abstruse energy state, they certainly couldn't use ordinary means. Zen nodded in understanding. From what he saw, the bald giant opened his mouth, waved his hands and roared endlessly in the cold prison. But what he heard was a melodious and rhythmic song. It was perhaps the expression he could see on the giant's face that gave him the sense of anger in the song. Can you decipher what he is saying? Zen inquired. I can give it a go, the green figure said. The calculation civilization wouldn't miss this chance to communicate with a creature from the abstruse energy world. However, this was also the first time the calculation civilization would attempt to translate the sounds of the abstruse energy world. A lack of previous samples for reference meant it would take much longer to decipher the song. Since Zen had come this far, he was in no rush to move on to stage 31 of the other shore. After asking for Libby's and Elizabeth's opinions, he decided to wait on the spot. This time, the core of Heavenly Obsession civilization calculated for more than 20 hours. Day and night did not actually exist in the blooming jade stage, but around a day and a night had passed before the core of Heavenly Obsession civilization got a rough translation of the bald giant's language. It was made easier by the fact the giant used simple words. He is cursing the element spirit race. He says that the members of the element spirit race are cunning swindlers who lured him to this place. Quote. Zen now began to understand the situation a little more. The bald giant appeared to have been tricked into entering this world by the element spirit race, and then imprisoned in this place. Anyone would be as angry as he was after being imprisoned for so long. It was understandable that he wanted to tear apart any creature he came across. Zen and the girls had been waiting for a whole day and night, and the bald giant had sung the entire time. His resentment towards the creatures in the chaos was quite clear. Is there any way to communicate with him? Zen asked hopefully. Since he was capable of using language, communication with him should be possible. Zen would not waste the chance to speak to him. We have only deciphered part of his words. We can try, but I'm afraid it's difficult to imitate the way he speaks, the green figure said. The bald giant's speech seemed to have multiple syllables, and when he spoke it sounded as if more than 10 people spoke together. The green figure taught Zen a rough method of pronunciation, and he then walked off singing. Just as he began singing, the bald giant suddenly stopped. He stared intensely at Zen with eyes wide open. Does he understand me? Zen's heart filled with joy. He continued walking forward, and at the same time, singing what he wished to say. But then, the giant pounced and an enormous hand appeared once more, drawing a large arc as it slapped down towards the three of them. Retreat. Zen frowned and retreated under the cover of the divine fire shield. Bang! The gigantic hand left a mark of 5 fingers on the solid ice surface. The bald giant snickered and slowly withdrew his hand. Your song must be very unpleasant to the ears, Elizabeth said with a cheeky smile. Zen shrugged helplessly. I suppose I don't sing the right way. The giant's way of speaking involved multiple syllables. Expressing it through a human's way of speaking was incredibly difficult. It was possible that despite Zen singing for a long time, the bald giant didn't understand a word. Zen tried a few more times, even asking the primeval Lord of Heaven and the snake goddess to brainstorm solutions, but all attempts failed. The bald giant maintained a furious frown, reacting violently to Zen's every approach. Feeling helpless, Zen had to give up, for now. After bypassing the 30-mile-wide cold prison, they continued towards the other side of the upper ice field. The cold prisons were in the center of the whole ice field. Once they left this area, moving forward would be easy. Several hours later, they finally arrived at the other side of the upper ice field. Elizabeth chose a spot and melted a cave 1,000 feet deep beneath the ice. Going down the cave, they reached the lower ice field. Chapter 3336, Magical Thunder Slave. The lower ice field of the blooming jade stage was still frozen solid, and there were even snowflakes continuously falling from the sky. Still, the cold here was more bearable than that at the upper ice field. Even if they removed the divine fire shield, the temperature remained pleasantly cool, like they were in a breezy field in the middle of spring. A circular ice castle loomed in the distance. It looked fantastical given its smooth, azure surface, as if everything about the castle was carved entirely out of solid ice. The entirety of the blooming jade stage was largely controlled by the element spirit race. There was a total of 6 ice castles in the lower ice field, 5 of which were distributed in the middle of the ice field. All star rings were placed in this last one. "Follow me," Elizabeth said. After putting away the divine fire shield, she took Zen and Libby with her to approach the side of the ice castle. Just as they were some distance away, she advised Zen and Libby to find a place to wait while she headed straight into the castle alone. Zen took her warning to heart and was instinctively on guard as Elizabeth's figure disappeared. The blooming jade stage was the most important gathering place for the element spirit race, and there was no way they were simply going to let Zen pass through peacefully. The race's defense must be at the maximum. In fact, Zen's assumptions weren't wrong. The element spirit race had indeed dispatched a lot of soldiers to guard the first few ice castles. However, they never expected Elizabeth to help him sneak into the last castle through the upper ice field. Despite their sneaky efforts, however, Elizabeth knew that this last ice castle was heavily guarded and she did not want Zen to break in by force. In order to avoid any untoward incidents, she wanted to scope out the area and check the situation by herself first. News of the Sun Crow race's defeat had already spread. However, the matter that Elizabeth, Micah, and the other members of the Sun Crow race had switched sides remained a secret. The element spirit race was not aware of these members' betrayal. All surviving members of the Sun Crow race told the same narrative. They survived the battle with the Oneness Sky Palace and then hid themselves after escaping from the Bloom Divine Province. It was difficult to verify their claims, so, in the end, the element spirit race still regarded Elizabeth as someone who could be trusted. When she arrived at the gates, she found it guarded by 2 chill ice slaves. Chill ice slaves could morph into various forms. Right now, they looked like strange insects with strong, slender legs for speed and blade-covered bodies for defense. As Elizabeth approached, one of the chill ice slaves took a step forward. All 7 blades that covered his body were pointed at her, closing in on her from both sides. The suddenness of the act and the inherently cold temperature of the blades made Elizabeth tremble. These chill ice slaves were more powerful than moonfire slaves, and the environment of stage 30 was advantageous to them. Even if Elizabeth had been to stage 32, she might not be a match against them here. "Show me your token," the chill ice slave ordered brusquely. Elizabeth obliged, stretching out her hand and summoning the small, triangular token from her Sumeru space. Although the element spirit race controlled the blooming jade stage, they weren't previously as strict when it came to controlling the passages. However, things quickly changed after the war between the Oneness Sky Palace and the Sun Crow race broke out. The chill ice slave took Elizabeth's token and pinched it. After the edge of the token flashed with a ray of light, it was returned to Elizabeth. "Enter through the left door." Her face flashed with a strange expression when she heard the arrangement. All the star rings should be behind the middle door. Why did the chill ice slave tell her to go through the left one? She didn't really have a choice though. She had already come to the ice castle and there was no reason for her not to follow the order of the element spirit race. As she entered through the left door, Elizabeth noticed the floor flash blue from the thin layer of soul-restraining sand that covered it. She had a bad feeling about this. Before she could venture forth, Elizabeth decided to turn back and flap her wings in an effort to escape. Swish! She immediately tried to take off and scale along the side of the castle. However, as she began to rise, a handful of soul-restraining sand blew towards her. Elizabeth spun in the air, her wings stirring up strong winds. The strong gale got rid of most of the soul-restraining sand. Unfortunately, a few grains found their way to the surface of her holy soul, which meant she wasn't going to be able to leave the other shore anytime soon. Whoosh, whoosh, the 2 chill ice slaves, who stood guard in front of the ice castle, bent down and 4 silvery wings grew out of their bodies as they rushed towards Elizabeth at an extremely fast speed. Swoosh, 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 their bodies were covered with blades that began to spiral, making them look like 2 mobile mixers. Elizabeth was well aware of just how powerful these chill ice slaves were. In order to avoid them, she dove down sharply before rising up at the last moment. With the crisis momentarily averted, she decided to fly close to the ground outside the castle. Her wings flashed with golden light and the divine flames fluttered in the wind like heralding flags. The fire swirled around those 2 chill ice slaves who continued to chase after her so closely. Although the chill ice slaves were stronger than the moonfire slaves, they had one weakness: fearing fire. The element spirit race was made up of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth spirits. These chill ice slaves were actually born from water spirits. Although they were fast, they had no choice but to slow down in order to avoid Elizabeth's flames. This led to a wider gap between them and her. Just as Elizabeth breathed more easily and figured that she might be able to get lucky and escape, an explosion suddenly came from inside the ice castle. When she looked, she saw a ball of lightning that had risen into the air. This ball of lightning contained a rough outline of a person. Crack! There was a sharp sound as the ball of lightning exploded and rushed towards Elizabeth at breakneck speed. It wasn't in the element spirit race's nature to participate in fights directly, and they preferred to create all kinds of slaves to serve as their champions in battle. The creature formed by this ball of lightning was called the Magical Thunder Slave. Elizabeth was in trouble now. If the Chill Ice slaves were already powerful, this Magical Thunder Slave was a few notches stronger. Crack, crack. Before the deafening explosion could reach her ears, Elizabeth had used all her strength to roll forward. Boom! She felt a wave of power behind her as the explosion caused devastating ruin and created a deep hole on the ground. It was fortunate that she was able to get away. There was no time to see the extent of the damage. She was able to dodge once, but she had to keep moving. Cough! KOF! KOF! Streaks of lightning revealed the slave's face and his irregular smile. From behind her, the Magical Thunder Slave had transformed into a bolt of lightning that was determined to strike her down. The face formed by the lightning quickly twisted and finally turned into a straight line, hitting her body precisely. Crack! There was a sickeningly loud sound that echoed through Elizabeth's ears as she was sent up into the sky by the lightning, rolling like a leaf in the wind. Fortunately, she had achieved the Holy Soul, so her injuries weren't so serious. Had she only been an indigo soul, then she would have already been shattered. Boom! As Elizabeth fell from the sky, the Magical Thunder Slave rushed towards her. When she landed, she hit the ground hard and rolled thousands of feet before stopping. Those who betray our element spirit race never have a good ending. Elizabeth heard another thunderous roar as the Magical Thunder Slave's body gathered terrifying lightning energy and became blindingly white. Chapter 3337, Imprisoning Lightning. Elizabeth lay on the ground and stared at the gradually brightening Magical Thunder Slave. Her face darkened with despair. Not long ago, she had contacted the element spirit race, and conferred with Micah and the others in stage 32. The element spirit race, still regarding the losers of the Sun Crow race as their allies, had not been on guard against them. How could her secret have been exposed as soon as she entered the ice castle? At this point, however, the reason hardly mattered. The fact was that Elizabeth was no match for the Magical Thunder Slave. Indeed, after fending off his first two attacks, she was already exhausted. She was certain that she couldn't withstand the next one. At that moment, unbidden, the thought of Zen came into Elizabeth's mind. Zen and Libby were hiding not far away, and she hoped dearly that the Magical Thunder Slave and the Chill Ice slaves would not be able to find them. A crash of thunder was heard in the air. The Magical Thunder Slave rushed towards Elizabeth, launching his next attack. She waited helplessly for the onslaught. But as the lightning approached Elizabeth, a figure darted forward from the side. It was Zen. Elizabeth had led them competently and cautiously through the upper ice field. Moreover, she had been calm and confident as she entered the ice castle, so Zen had believed that she would pass through safely. To his surprise, not long after she entered the ice castle, she had been chased out. Zen and Libby were crouched together in an ice pit, concealing themselves. At the unmistakable sound of thunder and battle, Zen had warily poked his head out of the ice pit, determined to see what was happening. He'd seen and understood Elizabeth's plight, and immediately jumped out of the pit to aid her. Libby tried to stop him, but Zen went anyway. Libby sighed. It was already a risk for them to sneak through the blooming jade stage. Now that Zen had revealed himself, they wouldn't be able to hide any longer. Zen moved with such speed that the air whistled past him. He reached out and tried to grasp the lightning as it struck at Elizabeth. To his astonishment, he found that it was the real body of the Magical Thunder Slave, which writhed like a lightning snake most of the time. "So, you dare to try and catch me?" The Magical Thunder Slave spoke in a sneering voice, but he was also caught by surprise at how Zen had seemingly rushed out of nowhere. Moreover, Zen had appeared with a physical body, and the Magical Thunder Slave wondered to which race he belonged. Who would dare to help Elizabeth in the blooming jade stage? The Magical Thunder Slave hesitated for a moment before realizing that he couldn't see Zen's face clearly. It meant this warrior had entered the other shore with his physical body. He immediately realized that Zen might be the human brat long sought by his superiors on the other shore. But how had he passed through the other ice castles? As far as the Magical Thunder Slave knew, the Magical Thunder Slaves, the Chill Ice Slaves, and the Moon Fire Slaves, all stronger than himself, had already made those ice castles impassable. It should have been impossible for Zen to come through. But since he was here, safe and sound, that could only mean that Zen had somehow broken through all the strong lines of defense that barred his way. Then it must be that Zen's power was far greater than it appeared at first glance. As the magical thunder slave considered these implications, he hesitated, yet remained confused and vigilant about Zen's strength. But anyway, the magical thunder slave was among the most powerful of the element spirit race. He did not believe that Zen could defeat him directly. And as for how Zen had arrived here, well, there must be some hidden reason he could not see. The magical thunder slave was half right. It was true that Zen didn't arrive here through normal way. But he was wrong about Zen's power. Zen was definitely strong enough to defeat him in a fight. There was a sizzling noise, as though from an electric current. Zen kept his grip on the lightning, but it was very thick and wiry in his hand. Like a snake, the lightning coiled around his hands and up his arms, twisting around his neck. It released the terrifying power of thunder as it moved along Zen's body, corroding his physical body and rapidly consuming his chaotic source spirits. The truth of godly way could be used to restore the chaotic source spirits in Zen's body, but it was not quickly enough to match the speed of the lightning attack. This magical thunder slave is indeed extremely powerful. Primeval Lord of Heaven, please help me. Aloud he said. Zen had been also well prepared before coming to this place. The Primeval Lord of Heaven had a deep understanding of the element spirit race, so he must know the ways of restraining them. However, the Primeval Lord of Heaven was not an invincible existence. His physical body was still trapped in stage 33. Currently, he was just an energy soul. But with the help of the power of a civilization artifact, he was able to defeat those weak members of the element spirit race in and below stage 28. But the blooming jade stage, where Zen, Elizabeth, and Libby now found themselves, was already stage 30. In this stage, due to weaker and weaker suppression, the creatures of the other shore became stronger and stronger. Even the Primeval Lord of Heaven didn't have the confidence to win by himself in an encounter with the magical thunder slave, so he needed to rely on Zen. A buzzing sound filled the air. After Zen voiced his request, sparks of purple light flashed in his hands. They traveled from his skin and into the body of the magical thunder slave, which was still entwined around Zen's body. The effect of the purple light was quick and remarkable. As the purple light shone on the magical thunder slave, his body became solid and opaque, turning into a muddy, grayish-brown substance. "What have you done?" asked the magical thunder slave, sounding shocked. He wrapped himself more tightly around Zen's body and frantically released the power of thunder. The magical thunder slave had already been amazed when, upon his attack, Zen managed to resist for several seconds. But after all, he had heard that Zen's physical body was incomparable, and that he had even become the ruler of stage 14. So the magical thunder slave was prepared for an extraordinary display of strength. Still, he had never imagined that Zen would be able to release a Thurgy capable of altering his lightning form. The magical thunder slave lived in the lightning form. That made him an immensely difficult enemy, for as an entity of pure energy he was capable of powerful attacks and was virtually immortal. The purple light was the work of the Primeval Lord of Heaven. It was called the imprisoning lightning. When it was first conceived, the imprisoning lightning was not used as a weapon against the magical thunder slaves. A long time ago, the group of human heroes led by the Primeval Lord of Heaven ended up being trapped in the heavenly thunder plane of stage 33. At that time, the 77th civilization hadn't been destroyed. All the human masters, including the Primeval Lord of Heaven, didn't dare to return to the other shore. The Primeval Lord of Heaven was forced into seclusion in the chaos for a long while before he finally created the imprisoning lightning and led the human masters back to the other shore. The imprisoning lightning was not intended to destroy thunder. Instead, it acted to infuse another unique energy into the electric force of thunder. When the imprisoning lightning merged with the thunder would be converted into another form. After the Primeval Lord of Heaven released the purple light of the imprisoning lightning, the lightning that covered the entire plane turned into grayish-brown objects that fell onto the ground. The heavenly thunder plane, which had been rumbling for billions of years, became quiet for perhaps the first time in known history. Now, the imprisoning lightning that had silenced the lightning of the heavenly thunder plane also had an astounding effect on the magical thunder slave. The purple light was not released by the civilization artifact, it was the Primeval Lord of Heaven's own Thurgy. The Primeval Lord of Heaven in Zen's body was just an energy soul, so he could only release the imprisoning lightning at a very close range. In this case, Zen had needed to get as close as possible to the magical thunder slave to ensure the effectiveness of the attack. The purple light flashed as it was emitted from Zen's hands, continuing to pass through the lightning body of the magical thunder slave. To his horror, the magical thunder slave realized that his range of movement was becoming more and more limited as his body turned into a solid grayish-brown substance. He felt stiff, almost as though he had been paralyzed. Chapter 3338, Fleeing Back. The grayish-brown substances could be ground into powder, which was called the solid lightning powder. It was a kind of material that was formed after lightning was solidified, but the lightning's energy still remained in the powdered form. Back then, the primeval Lord of Heaven asked some powerful human warriors to collect the brown substances on the heavenly thunder plane, and later he ground them into solid lightning powder. Generally speaking, a considerable amount of solid lightning powder could release an extremely terrifying amount of power. For instance, there was a time when a divine retribution beast hunted down humans on stage 33. The human warriors suffered many casualties, but when their lives were finally at stake, the primeval Lord of Heaven threw a large amount of solid lightning powder into the giant mouth of the divine retribution beast. After that came an explosion, then the lightning bolts that erupted formed a large circular ball of lightning. It unleashed such a powerful force that even the primeval Lord of Heaven himself was shocked. After all, they did collect those lightning bolts on the heavenly thunder plane for several days, so it surely had a strong effect. When the attack badly mutilated the divine retribution beast's head, the human warriors survived. Of course, Zen didn't know where the imprisoning lightning came from, but he wouldn't let the opportunity pass, especially when the magical thunder slave had shown up with a form. Crack, crack, crack. As he kneaded the grayish-brown substances with both of his hands, they quickly pulverized into powder and scattered all over the ground. No, you can't do this. Stop. The magical thunder slave roared continuously from the last section of the lightning bolt. Generally speaking, the moon fire slaves and the chill ice slaves all had spiritual cores. Those spiritual cores were their life source, so they needed to conceal them well when they were in battle. If their spiritual cores were damaged, they would die. On the other hand, the magical thunder slaves didn't have spiritual cores, because they didn't die easily with their special life forms. That was why the magical thunder slave didn't expect Zen knew the way to kill him. Despite that, he refused to give up even in his death. He struggled and roared, and his cries pounded in Zen's ears like thunder. As for Zen, he acted as if he didn't hear anything. He simply unleashed the imprisoning lightning and crushed the magical thunder slave into powdery bits. When only the magical thunder slave's last section remained, he transformed into a human face and begged for his life, but Zen didn't give him any chance. A purple beam of light flashed, then the human face became powder in Zen's fingers. How did you kill a magical thunder slave so easily? Elizabeth, who lay on the ice, uttered in disbelief. She used to work for the element spirit race, so she was familiar with the magical thunder slaves and chill ice slaves. The ever-changing magical thunder slaves had left a deep impression on her. After all, they were powerful, indestructible, and immensely fast. They were almost perfect creatures that were born to fight. However, such a powerful being didn't survive for 5 minutes in Zen's hands. This man. Now, Zen didn't know what Elizabeth was thinking. He stared attentively at the 2 chill ice slaves nearby and asked, "What should we do now?" Break in directly. Unfortunately, he didn't know the situation in the ice castle. If no one guarded the ice castle like on stage 28, he would just charge straight in and head upwards to stage 31. Even though Elizabeth was weak now, her mind was still sharp. "Charge in," she immediately ordered. According to her judgment, the element spirit race would place most of their forces in the first few ice castles while the last ice castle wouldn't be heavily guarded. However, it didn't matter much because Zen had already killed a magical thunder slave. Zen pulled Elizabeth up from the ground and said to Libby, "Follow me." Libby nodded while the wings on Elizabeth's back began to glow with a golden light. Despite her frail state, she could still control the divine flames of the Sun Crow race to defend against attacks. The 2 chill ice slaves that saw Zen kill the magical thunder slave were also afraid of him now. When they found out that he was about to break into the ice castle, they had no choice but to defend despite their fear. Just as Zen was about to move forward, however, the ice castle suddenly shook, and waves of reddish-brown soil burst forth from it. The mass of soil carried strong waves of energy as well. As soon as it was released, it quickly turned into multiple humans made of soil. "Burial Earth slaves," Elizabeth exclaimed. These burial Earth slaves also belonged to 5 element slaves. Although they moved slowly, they had powerful defensive power. They were harder to kill than the magical thunder slaves. Had they guarded the ice castle, then Zen and his company would have a difficult time breaking in. No matter what kind of slave they are, we can only break in by force. Zen shouted. With that, he gritted his teeth and rushed towards the ice castle. But when he was halfway, a blue beam of light flashed from the inside of the ice castle, and snow-white figures came out of it. They were chill ice slaves, and there were probably more than a dozen of them. With so many burial earth slaves and chill ice slaves that surrounded the ice castle, it was almost impossible for Zen to break in by force. He stopped abruptly, and his face turned grim. He and Libby were able to retreat from the other shore, but Elizabeth would die there. Furthermore, the element spirit race would likely send more forces to guard the place after they left, and he would never expect to return to the other shore again. Boom, 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 deafening roars sounded from afar, and streaks of lightning chased after them. It turned out that the magical thunder slaves from the other ice castles immediately came after they got the news. Everything became worse now that they couldn't break into the ice castle, and an army of magical thunder slaves surrounded them from behind. There was almost no way to escape. Before the soul-restraining sand taints both of you, you'd better leave the other shore now, Elizabeth croaked. She also knew the consequence if Zen retreated from the other shore, but at least he could save his life. Besides, there was no other choice. Zen suddenly looked up and said, "No, there's another way." Upon hearing his words, Elizabeth and Libby immediately realized what he was talking about. He meant to flee back to the upper ice field. The ice cave they had just dug wasn't completely frozen yet, but there was a layer of ice pieces that had solidified. Nevertheless, they still had a chance to go up and escape. "Let's go." The second Zen made his decision, he pulled Libby, hoisted Elizabeth on his back, then flew upward. The two chill ice slaves not far away saw that he wanted to escape, but they wouldn't let him get away so easily. They flapped their wings and quickly followed them. Humph! Elizabeth snorted coldly. Her golden wings suddenly shook. Then the blazing divine flames of the Sun Crow race swept down like fire clouds and forced the two chill ice slaves back. Whoosh! In less than 9 seconds, Zen finally entered the ice cave. As the golden flames burned inside it, the icicles all around it melted. Afterwards, he went through the ice sheet and climbed up to the upper ice field. At the same time, Elizabeth took out and ignited the divine fire shield, which covered the top of their heads. While Zen held the divine fire shield in one hand, pulled Libby with the other, and carried Elizabeth on his back, he swiftly ran on the intensely cold upper ice field. Chapter 3339, A Trap at the Dead End. Not long after Zen and the two girls passed through the ice cave, the two chill ice slaves caught up with them. The other kinds of 5-element slaves wouldn't be able to cope under extremely low temperatures, but the chill ice slaves' body temperature was also quite low. Thus, it wasn't hard for them to survive in such an environment. As soon as the chill ice slaves, who were crystal clear, rushed to the upper ice field, white frost immediately covered the surface of their bodies. They were immensely flexible before, but now they were also a bit slow. Follow them. Summon the other 5-element slaves to attack them. The two chill ice slaves hadn't forgotten the miserable death of the magical thunder slave, so they were smart enough not to make a move immediately, but instead, followed Zen and his companions behind. Meanwhile, Zen occasionally observed the movements behind him as he sped forward. "What do they mean by closely following us like this?" Libby asked. "That's the most troublesome," Elizabeth said and shook her head. If Zen could get rid of them, then the three of them could find a place and wait for the soul-restraining sand on Elizabeth's body to lose effect there. After that, they could silently leave the other shore to avoid any trouble and consider how to enter stage 31 of the other shore later. However, they couldn't leave the other shore at all because the chill ice slaves followed them everywhere. "We have to find a way to get rid of them," Zen said with gritted teeth. The wind ran through his hair as he continued to rush forward at high speed. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks. Buzz! Once he steadied himself on the icy surface, he ran towards the two chill ice slaves in the opposite direction. Of course, the two chill ice slaves were also very vigilant. The moment Zen stopped moving forward, they stopped as well. When they saw him rush towards them, they flapped their wings and quickly retreated. They always kept a distance of about 1,000 feet from Zen, which was neither near nor too far. On the other hand, Zen felt helpless when he realized that he couldn't catch up with the chill ice slaves. Thus, he had no choice but to turn back and move forward. At the same time, the ice in another area of the upper ice field broke. A cold wind blew through it, and a huge ice cave appeared. Crack! A giant fiery hand stretched out from the ice cave and pressed on its edge. Then, a huge body covered in green flames jumped out from it. It was a moonfire slave. "Wow! It's so cold," the moonfire slave exclaimed as he shivered. Generally speaking, the Moonfire slaves weren't suited to the immensely cold environment in the blooming jade stage. Therefore, they had to take extra protection measures if they wanted to climb to the upper ice field. Now, the armor on the Moonfire slave's body was similar to the Divine Fire Shield. As long as the armor was injected with a certain amount of flames, they could resist the intense coldness and low temperature. Still, the Moonfire slaves were annoyed at the severely low temperature. Yet, they were given an order. They were surprised when they heard that the human man they had been waiting for actually fled to the upper ice field. Then again, they didn't have to stay in the cold for too long as they captured that man and fulfilled their mission. At that moment, tall and big Moonfire slaves came out of the square ice cave one by one. Once the Moonfire slaves confirmed their target's location, they ran towards that direction at full speed. Although the ice was 1,000 feet thick, it trembled like there was an earthquake since so many Moonfire slaves ran over it. While that happened, an ice hole in the size of a bowl appeared in another area of the upper ice field. Crack, thick streaks of thunder emerged from the ice hole. Then, magical thunder slaves, which looked like long snakes, swirled in the air and quickly turned into strange and abstract human shapes. They all silently confirmed the location of their target. Then, they went straight in that direction. They immediately intertwined and elongated into much longer snakes, then moved forward at an extremely high speed. It turned out that the two chill ice slaves regularly sent Zen's location to their companions. The 5 element slaves formed a huge circle and charged from all directions. Crack, 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 Zen's eyes slightly darkened when he heard the rumble of thunder again. He looked to the left and saw a burst of thunder in the distance. He knew that the magical thunder slaves must be near. Dong, dong, dong. At that point, the ground began to shake rhythmically as well. Then, more tall Moonfire slaves chased them from another side. These 5 element slaves' momentum became increasingly palpable, and Zen and his companions had a slimmer chance to retreat. After he ran forward for a while, he saw a cold prison which was dozens of miles wide. There were 5 element slaves in 3 directions, while in front of them was the cold prison, which was a forbidden area. Zen and the 2 girls truly had no escape. What should we do? Libby bit her lip. She was still young. She didn't want to die, nor did she want her soul of light to be trapped in the blooming jade stage. Zen did not respond to Libby. He just frowned and slowly stepped back against the cold prison. Just then, he heard the primeval Lord of Heaven's voice that said, "Zen, get close to that cold prison." Get close to the cold prison? He was confused. The bald giant confined in the largest cold prison was dangerous. When it came to strength alone, he was more powerful than all the 5 element slaves. If Zen recklessly went closer to it, the bald giant would attack him. Wouldn't that be courting death? That bald giant should hate the element spirit race more than he hates you, the primeval Lord of Heaven replied simply. Zen arched one brow upon hearing those words. There was a dead end ahead of them. Even with the primeval Lord of Heaven's help, it would be difficult for him to defeat so many 5 element slaves. But if the primeval Lord of Heaven's assumption was true, then that might be a solution. According to the Heavenly Obsession civilization, the element spirit race had captured the bald giant, so the giant must loathe them the most. In turn, Zen nodded and said to the green figure, "Please help me activate the core of Heavenly Obsession civilization. I want to see the inside of the cold prison." As soon as he finished speaking, the core of Heavenly Obsession civilization in the distance was activated again. Since the Heavenly Obsession civilization had already deciphered the light dots in the cold prison before, it was now more skilled in doing the task. 2 rays of green light entered Zen's pupils, and he quickly saw the inside of the cold prison. He was taken aback. The bald giant was already over the edge of the cold prison. His bell-like eyes were wide open, his body lunged forward, and overall he looked like he was ready to pounce at any time. The primeval Lord of Heaven was right about one thing, that this bald giant couldn't hate the element spirit civilization more. He always wanted to tear up the members of the element spirit race. Now that he saw the 5 element slaves, he even intended to swallow them alive. Of course, the Moonfire slaves didn't understand the light spots in the cold prison, nor did they know that there was a powerful giant inside of it who had his eyes on them. They only knew that there was a dead end behind Zen and that he couldn't retreat. "Human boy, you cannot escape now. If you obediently follow us back, we can still keep you alive," the Moonfire slave in the front of their group said with a sinister smile. This Moonfire slave planned to drill an ice cave from their current spot and return to the lower ice field because he hated the low temperature of the upper field so much. However, Zen didn't respond to him, and instead, continued to step back. The bald giant was bound in chains, so he could only attack within a range of 3,000 feet around the cold prison. Now Zen was already within the 3,000 feet range, but the bald giant still didn't move. It seemed that he indeed did not target Zen. Chapter 3340, A Pair of Giant Hands. Both Libby and Elizabeth were also extremely nervous. While they couldn't see the giant with their own eyes, they had already been attacked by his hands before. If his strike landed, they would both have already been dead. But they were left with no other choice. Covered by the divine fire shield, Zen retreated step by step. Meanwhile, the moon fire slaves moved forward at the same pace, with the chill ice slaves and the magical thunder slaves approaching from the other directions. 3,000 feet, 2,000 feet. When Zen retreated to within 2,000 feet from the cold prison, the 5-element slaves entered the bald giant's range of attack. As he retreated, Zen observed the creature when he could. The giant maintained his original posture, keeping his eyes wide open. The giant seems really calm, Zen thought to himself. Does he want to capture all these 5-element slaves in one go? 1,000 feet, 500 feet. Zen turned back frequently, which drew the 5-element slaves' attention. The moon fire slave leading the group chuckled, "Brat, why do you keep looking back? Can you see what's in the cold prison?" The moon fire slaves, the chill ice slaves, and the magical thunder slaves all knew of the bald giant trapped in the cold prison. To get him in there, the element spirit race had to pour in great effort. As the slaves of this race, they had to do everything just to imprison the creature. But now that the bald giant was trapped, he could barely move, and was no longer as threatening as he had been before. Nevertheless, the moon fire slave couldn't help but feel a bit confused by Zen's behavior. Zen should have only been seeing light dots in the cold prison, so what was he looking at? As Zen continued retreating, he smiled as he said, "Of course I can. If you can see clearly, then can you tell me what lies in the cold prison?" From the left, a magical thunder slave sneered. Naturally, none of them believed Zen could see within the prison. Zen's eyes narrowed at the challenge. It was a critical moment. The primeval Lord of Heaven had correctly guessed the bald giant's mental state. He had been intensely irritable since his imprisonment, he hated all creatures on the other shore. It was no wonder he launched an attack at Zen the moment he woke up. Two reasons kept Zen from successfully communicating with the bald giant. On the one hand, he couldn't pronounce the Sanskrit words, and on the other hand, the bald giant was immediately hostile toward him. But judging from how the giant patiently waited for the 5-element slaves to continue approaching, he was not stupid by any means. And so now, Zen had to make sure the giant knew he was an enemy to the 5-element slaves. While the giant possibly already knew the fact, Zen needed to deepen his impression. An enemy's enemy was a friend, after all. In his mind, Zen made contact with the primeval Lord of Heaven. In mere seconds, he replied, "There is a bald giant in the cold prison." Zen's answer completely stunned the moonfire slaves. They hadn't expected him to get it right. Could he truly see what was happening in the cold prison, they wondered. While they were stuck in a daze, Zen abruptly rushed forward, grasping the divine fire shield in his hand. As he closed the distance, he called in his mind, "Primeval Lord of Heaven, please take action." He had to keep the shield in place to protect Elizabeth and Libby, hindering him from properly fighting. All he could do was leave it up to the primeval Lord of Heaven. With an energy soul's strength, it was impossible for the primeval Lord of Heaven to defeat all the 5-element slaves, but at the very least, he could easily kill off 1 or 2 moonfire slaves. The moment Zen rushed forward rapidly, the shadow of the primeval Lord of Heaven appeared, pointing ahead of him. Buzz. Using the book's power, he shot out a ray of light from his fingertip. Whoosh! In an instant, the ray pierced through the spiritual core within the body of the moonfire slave right in front of the group. The body began trembling instantaneously, the green flames in his body surging before getting extinguished in the next second. His armor disintegrated and fell to the ground. By killing one of them, Zen wanted to signal to the giant that he was on the opposite side of the element spirit race. From where he was, he couldn't quite tell if his action was effective enough. He figured he'd have to leave it up to fate. The moment the moonfire slave was killed, Zen retreated. In the next instant, he was flying over 500 feet before reaching the edge of the cold prison. If he took another mere step, he would have fallen in. Despite the divine fire shield's protection, Zen and the 2 girls could still feel a chill creeping up their backs. Zen had already killed one of their companions, and the moonfire slave died because of his spiritual core breaking. This meant complete death. All the 5-element slaves flew forward into a rage. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Their initially gentle approach turned into a high-speed chase heading straight after Zen. "Brat, how dare you? We won't let you die so easily," roared one of the Moonfire slaves. "What are you waiting for?" Zen thought to himself, turning back to the bald giant. To his surprise, the creature's eyes met his. It wasn't until that moment that Zen noticed a faint smile on the giant's face. It seemed that the giant had just seen through him. The Moonfire slaves were closing in on Zen, only worsening his anxiety. If the giant didn't make a move, Zen was as good as dead at that moment. When the Moonfire slaves were only about 100 feet away from Zen and the girls, countless dots of light within the cold prison suddenly curled up. A pair of giant hands extended from it, slamming down right before Zen. Bang! With an explosive sound, the pair of giant hands slapped about 8 Moonfire slaves who were rushing ahead of the group on the icy surface. The hands continued rolling on the ice. It wasn't the bald giant's first time fighting the element spirit race, so he knew that the flame creatures were driven by spiritual cores. By rolling his hands, he ground and crushed all the Moonfire slaves' armors, along with their bodies' spiritual cores. When the giant raised his hands, only armor debris remained on the ice, while the Moonfire slaves perished along with their spiritual cores. The Chill Ice slaves and the Magical Thunder slaves were all stunned by the sudden attack. All of them froze abruptly. Without anyone to give an order, they didn't know how to deal with the situation, they were all hesitant and stuck in place. Bang! The giant's hands moved decisively toward the Chill Ice slaves at an incredible speed. He swatted at them as though they were mere mosquitoes in summer. The Chill Ice slaves immediately changed their form once they saw the hands approaching. But just as the Moonfire slaves did, the Chill Ice slaves' lives depended on their spiritual cores. They only differed in that the Moonfire slaves had fire spiritual cores, while Chill Ice slaves had water spiritual cores. As the giant hands continued rolling over the icy surface, the Chill Ice slaves perished. And with that, the bald giant then targeted the Magical Thunder slaves. As it turned out, the bald giant was much smarter than Zen had expected. The creature seemed to know that the Magical Thunder slaves lacked spiritual cores, making them a more difficult kill. So his hands suddenly flew in the air, pushing the Magical Thunder slaves into the cold prison.